The sixth session of the Senate and the third regular session of the 18th Congress is hereby called to order. Senator Risa Ontiveros will lead the chamber in prayer.
Panginoon ng lakas, galing at kalinangan naming lahat. Ngayon pong huling araw ng sesyon, bago kami muli ay pumasok sa Enhanced Community Quarantine, kami po ay mataimtim na nagdadasal para sa aming mga kababayan na may mga kinakaharap na hamon at hirap dahil sa pandemya, kundi man sa kanilang kalusugan, sa kanilang kabuhayan. Tatagan niyo po ang loob ng ating health workers. Naway gabayan niyo ang kanilang kamay at ang kanilang isip at ipaabot sa kanila ang aming pasasalamat at paghanga. Ilayo niyo sa kapahamakan ang ating mga economic frontliners. Alagaan at kalingain niyo ang mga hindi pa nabakunahan dahil sa mga lehitimong dahilan, kagaya ng mga immunocompromised, mga bata at mga buntis. At panghuli, tulungan niyo po ang aming mga atletang sumasabak pa sa laban sa Japan. Naway manatili silang ligtas sa sakuna at madama nila ang saya ng isang bayang nagkakaisa para sa kanila. Amen.
Amen. Secretary will call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara,
Present.
Binay,
Present.
Cayetano,
Present.
De Lima, De La Rosa, Drilon,
Present.
Gatchalian, Go,
Present.
Gordon, Ontiveros,
Present.
Lacson, Lapid, Marcos,
Present.
Pacquiao, Pangilinan,
Present.
Pimentel III,
Present.
Poe,
Present.
Recto, Revilla Jr., Tolentino,
Recto, nandiyan.
Recto, Revilla, Villanueva, Villar,
Present.
Zubiri. Senate President Soto III is present.
Wala tayong agenda.
Agenda Monday, okay na?
Ha? Baka baliktad. Physically present? Baliktad eh. Bale, ako na. With 8 senators physically present and 13 senators virtually present for a total of 21, Chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the fourth session, Monday, August 2, 2021. Consider the same as approved.
Oh, just for the record, no, Senator Manny Pacquiao is online.
Thank you.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none, journals approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we defer the approval of the journal of the fifth session, Tuesday, August 3, 2021, as it's still being finalized.
Any objection? Hearing none, journals deferred.
I move that we proceed with the reference of business, Mr. President.
Secretary will proceed with reference to business.
Reference of business. Message of the President of the Philippines. Letter from the Executive Secretary Salvador C. Medialdea, retransmitting to the Senate the copy of the letter of President Rodrigo Roa Duterte dated 29 December 2016, which submits the instrument of ratification to the Arms Trade Treaty for the Senate's consideration and concurrence.
To the Committee on Foreign Relations.
Resolutions. PS Resolution number 813, resolution congratulating and commending Nesty Pistesio for honoring the country with an Olympic silver medal at the women's featherweight boxing event of the 2020 Summer Olympics at Kokugigan Arena in Tokyo, Japan on 3 August 2021, introduced by Senator Zubiri.
To the Committee on Rules.
PS Resolution number 814, resolution congratulating and commending Nesty Pistesio for winning the silver medal for the Philippines in the women's featherweight boxing competition at the 2020 Summer Olympics in Tokyo, Japan, introduced by Senator De La Rosa.
To the Committee on Rules.
PS Resolution number 815, resolution commending and congratulating Filipina boxer Nesty Pistesio for capturing the silver medal in the women's featherweight boxing division of the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, introduced by Senator Go.
To the Committee on Rules.
PS Resolution number 816, resolution commending and congratulating Nesty Pistesio for winning the silver medal in the women's featherweight division in boxing in the 2020 Olympics in Tokyo, Japan, introduced by Senator Revilla Jr.
To the Committee on Rules.
PS Resolution number 817, resolution directing the appropriate Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the impact of the community quarantine protocols on micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, especially in the food and beverage industry, with the end in view of formulating long-term solutions to assist MSMEs through the urgent formation of an interagency task force for economic recovery, introduced by Senator Poe.
To the Committees on Economic Affairs and Trade.
PS Resolution number 818, a resolution commending and congratulating Nesty Alcaide Petesio for being the first Filipino Olympic boxing medalist and for winning the silver medal for women's featherweight at the 2020 Olympics held at Tokyo International Forum in Tokyo, Japan, introduced by Senator Pacquiao.
To the Committee on Rules.
PS Resolution number 819, resolution congratulating and commending Nesty Petesio for winning a silver medal for the Philippines in boxing at the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, introduced by Senator Tolentino.
To the Committee on Rules.
PS Resolution number 820, resolution expressing appreciation and support to the efforts of the Manila Broadcasting Company through its DZRH radio station to help fight and the proliferation of fake news through its hashtag Account Koto campaign, introduced by Senator Soto III.
To the Committee on Rules.
PS Resolution number 821, resolution congratulating and commending Nesty Petesio for winning an Olympic silver medal in women's boxing at the 2020 Olympic Games in Tokyo, Japan, introduced by Senator Binay.
To the Committee on Rules.
PS Resolution number 822, resolution commending and congratulating Nesty Petesio for making history as the first Filipina boxer to win an Olympic silver medal, introduced by Senator Ontiveros.
To the Committee on Rules.
PS Resolution number 823, resolution recognizing and congratulating Nesty Petesio for being the silver medalist in the women's featherweight competition in the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, introduced by Senator Villanueva.
To the Committee on Rules. Additional reference of business, you may proceed.
Additional reference of business, messages from the House of Representatives. Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 2 August 2021, it designated Representatives Bravo Jr., Aglipay, Salceda, Romualdez, Cabuchan III, and Paduano as conferees to the Bicameral Conference Committee on the disagreeing provisions of House Number 7406, entitled An Act Strengthening and Modernizing the Bureau of Fire Protection and Appropriating Funds Therefore, and Senate Number 1832, An Act Strengthening and Modernizing the Bureau of Fire Protection and Appropriating Funds Therefore, and for other purposes.
To the Committee on Rules.
Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 2 August 2021, it passed the following House bills in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate. House Number 9272, an act renewing for another 25 years, franchise granted to Enrique M. Orozco and Sons, Incorporated, presently known as Real Radio Network, Inc., under Republic Act Number 8717, entitled An Act Granting the E.M. Orozco and Sons, Incorporated, a franchise to construct, install, establish, operate, and maintain radio and television broadcasting stations in the Philippines.
Referred to the Committee on Public Services.
House Number 9307, an act granting Philippine citizenship to Feng Li.
To the Committee on Justice and Human Rights.
House Number 9308, an act granting Philippine citizenship to Linlin Guo.
To the Committee on Justice and Human Rights.
House Number 9458, an act granting night shift differential pay to government employees, including those in government-owned or controlled corporations, and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committee on Rules.
House Number 9459, an act increasing the social pension of indigent senior citizens and appropriating funds therefore, amending for the purpose Republic Act Number 7432, entitled An Act to Maximize the Contribution of Senior Citizens to Nation Building Grant Benefits and Special Privileges, and for other purposes as amended.
referred to the Committees on Social Justice and Finance,
House Number 9489, an act proclaiming the first Monday of August of every year as Lineman Appreciation Day.
to the Committee on Energy,
House Number 9491, an act declaring November of every year as National Farmers and Fisherfolk Month and appropriating funds therefore.
to the Committees on Basic Education, Agriculture, and Finance,
House Number 9524, an act providing for mandatory insurance coverage and benefits for all line workers.
to the Committees on Energy, Labor,
And House Number 9556, an act providing for a new charter of the Development Bank of the Philippines, repealing for the purpose Executive Order Number 81 as amended.
to the Committee on Banks or Committees on Banks and Government Corporations,
Bills on first reading. Senate Number 2342, an act increasing the bed capacity of the Ilocos Training and Regional Medical Center in the city of San Fernando, province of La Union, from 300 to 800 beds and appropriating funds therefore, introduced by Senator Marcos.
to the Committees on Health and Finance,
Senate Number 2343, an act establishing the Ilocos Norte Sports Institute and Research in the province of Ilocos Norte and appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Marcos.
to the Committee on Rules,
Senate Number 2344, an act repealing Republic Act Number 10912, otherwise known as the Continuing Professional Development Act of 2016, introduced by Senator De La Rosa.
to the Committee on Civil Service,
Senate Number 2345, an act raising the age of sexual consent from 12 years old to 18 years old, amending for the purpose Article 266-A1D of Act Number 3815 as amended, otherwise known as the Revised Penal Code, introduced by Senator Villanueva.
to the Committees on Justice and Women,
Senate Number 2346, an act granting distinctive honors and privileges to national athletes, creating a national endowment fund for sports heroes and appropriating funds therefore, introduced by Senator
to
Villanueva.
the Committees on Sports and Finance. Majority Leader,
Mr. President,
well, Senator Ping Lacson was asking for the floor before we recognize the Minority Leader. Go ahead, Senator Lacson.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a parliamentary inquiry. Earlier today was visited by Ambassador Raul Hernandez from the DFA
Mhm.
because he's the newly designated DLLU for the Commission on Appointments. I was informed that there's a bill pending in this body in the Senate to attend to the retirement benefits of DFA officials. And I was told that while he's receiving the salary of 180,000 per month as Chief of Mission +1, ang retirement benefit pala natatanggap ng mga ambassadors is only 25,000. So I'd like to inquire, Mr. President, if there is such a pending bill in the Senate, and if I may request to take the cudgels for the retired ambassadors, kung pwede maisama natin sa priority legislation natin. That's all, Mr. President.
All right, the chairman of the Committee on Rules is asked to reply.
Yes, Mr. President. Actually, I already instructed my staff in the Rules Committee to locate the bill so that we can also prioritize scheduling and not only in the plenary, but of course, committee level. We just need to know the title of the bill, Mr. President. Out of the thousands that we have filed, I wish they gave us a heads up on the bill number, both in the House and the Senate, or the
Well,
title of the measure.
We now have the Secretariat checking
Yes.
on any Senate bill with that particular topic. And then perhaps we can direct also the Secretariat to ask the House of Representatives if they have such one, such a bill. You know, if we cannot find it here in the Senate.
Yes, pahanap po namin, Mr. President. We can
Yes, Senator Lacson, go ahead.
give an answer after.
Yes, I was also told that there are 2 bills filed in the House, Mr. President. So I'm just wondering if there is also a pending bill filed in the Senate, and to which committee
Right now,
was it referred?
right now, offhand, they could not locate anything to that effect.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
We're
President.
pretty much computerized. So perhaps we can ask a copy from the House of Representatives on their bill.
Yeah, I think it's quite unconscionable for a retired ambassador to be receiving only 25,000 pesos a month. And I was told also that there are only 400 retired ambassadors. So if it's indexed to the present salary of an ambassador, kung 180,000 times 400, if we're only talking of ambassadors, retired ambassadors, that's just about 72 million pesos, which I think the GAA can take care of, Mr.
Yeah,
President.
and besides,
Anyway.
if, in the House proposal or what they have discussed with you, Your Honor, is that carried over if they pass away? Carried to by their
Spouse?
spouse?
So, but
Hindi.
we did not discuss that, Mr. President.
Okay.
His concern is only the very low retirement benefits that retired ambassadors are receiving right now.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you,
The Secretariat is now well aware of the subject matter, and they will give a report to the Majority Leader, the Chairman of the Committee on Rules, on
Thank you,
what
Mr.
will
President.
transpire. We now, the Senate Minority Leader, with your permission, Majority Leader.
Yes, of course.
Go ahead, Minority Leader, Senator Dillon.
Mr. President, just very briefly, just a manifestation. Starting tomorrow, we will be suspending our sessions until the 21st of this month because of the pandemic. Mr. President, for the record, our most senior member, Senator Dick Gordon, will be celebrating his birthday tomorrow. And therefore, before we forget, may we make of record that we're greeting him a happy birthday. He's the most senior in the Senate, so it is just but fitting that we greet him on his 76th birthday, if I'm not mistaken, not 86th, according to the Majority Leader. It's not true, Mr. Majority Leader, that Senator Gordon is 86 years old. He's only 76 years old.
So he's the most senior as far as age is concerned. Yeah.
That's correct, sir. That's correct, sir.
Correct. All right. We wish Senator Dick Gordon a very happy birthday, and well, considering that there is no, there will be no sessions tomorrow. Well, at least we have extended our heartfelt greetings to him today.
And a reminder, Mr. President, that he's not exempted from the blowout of his colleagues.
Oh,
He could extend it, Mr. President, when we get back. First hour.
August 23.
August 23.
August 23.
Yung pamilya yun, Mr. President, masarap magpakain dahil sila yung may-ari ng napakaraming restaurant.
Hmm?
Ano? Barbara's and also Wildflower, kanila din.
Really? Yeah. August 23.
Yes,
And
sir.
then perhaps August 24 and 25, again, there will be two celebrations. Only August 24, actually.
Sino po yung August 24, sir?
The presiding officer and Senator Pangilinan.
Happy birthday, boss. Happy birthday.
Advance happy birthday to the Senate President.
And advance
Same to you.
to Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
He's the only one that I can say same to you when you say happy birthday, Senator Pangilinan.
Very good, Mr. President. So moving forward, we're awaiting the Bicameral report on the BFP bill. I believe it was just filed, so we have an additional reference of business to be able to tackle it later on. But for the meantime, I move to the first item on the agenda, Mr. President. I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2152 under Committee Report number 252. Yes, 252.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of 2152 is in order.
Thank you, Mr. President. The status is we're still in the period of interpellation, although there are no longer anyone who wishes to interpellate except for brief manifestations. So, but before that, may we call the sponsor, the distinguished gentleman from Valenzuela, future Vice President, Mr. President of the country. May karibal na po kayo, Mr. President. No other than Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, Mr. President.
Senator Sherwin Gatchalian is recognized, the sponsor of the measure 2152.
Hindi mo talaga mapigil, ano?
Joke lang yun, joke lang.
Yes, Mr. President. Nawala tuloy ako. Let me manifest, Mr. President, there are no more of our colleagues who want to interpolate the said measure, Mr. President. So may I request to close the period of interpolation, Mr. President.
What does the majority leader say?
Senator Joel would just like to give a quick manifestation. Mr. President.
Senator Joel Villanueva is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. Thank you to our future Vice President also. Mr. President, yesterday before EJ Obiena leaped into the pole vault Olympics finals, Mr. President, I was listening attentively to the exchanges of our colleagues, our education champions here in the Senate, Senator Pia, Senator Win, even Senator Migs. And while watching EJ, I can't help but think of the Teacher Education Excellence Bill as a long and flexible pole that can also help our teachers leap high for our learners. That's why I believe in and support this measure, Senate Bill number 2152, which seeks to strengthen the Teacher Education Council. Mr. President, we submit that the radical reform envisioned by SB 2152 can synchronize standards in teacher education and development, address the learning crisis, which is exacerbated by learning loss or COVID slide. And most importantly, I believe that the bill can improve the notoriously low passing rates in the licensure examination for teachers. In line with the discussions yesterday, Mr. President, where Senator Pia gave some insightful remarks on the ladderized education program and para teachers, I would like to reiterate the need to align the standards for teachers and school leaders to the Philippine Qualifications Framework, which we passed, Mr. President, in 2017. And at the appropriate time, we will introduce amendments so that the PQF could be utilized or integrated in this particular measure. Mr. President, we passed the PQF to encourage lifelong learning among our professionals, including teachers. Our Olympians, EJ, Hidilin, Nesty, Kaloy, etc., showed us the value of continuous learning and practice. It is their desire to exceed their personal best that led them to where they are now, Mr. President. Similarly, it is essential that our teachers are given the proper education and training they need. There is no argument about this, and I think, Mr. President, that this is the foundation of all our efforts. But it has to be continuing, like what they are doing in Japan, where mandatory courses are taken by all teachers to prepare them for the next level of responsibilities. There are also interest-based courses which are offered all year round. Teachers who feel they need some training for updates can attend these training sessions. We need, Mr. President, continuous training for our teachers because the rule of thumb for higher education is that the bachelor's program is only good for the first 5 years after graduation in one's profession. Before reaching the 5th year, one has to update himself or herself to survive and become updated. Naniniwala po tayo, Ginoong Pangulo, na ito rin ang vision ng ating chairman, Senator Gatchalian, dahil talaga naman pong parehong importante ang pre-service at in-service training ng ating mga guro. Lastly, Mr. President, may I say na yung pong supermarket of competencies na inintroduce po natin noon sa tech box sector through tulong trabaho law that we passed, palagay ko po applicable din sa mga teachers. If we want them to be effective teachers, they should have access to skills or competencies that they need, which is the vision of the PQF and the ladderized education program mentioned by our dear colleague, Senator Pia. If we can harmonize these measures with this bill, Mr. President, I believe that our teachers can leap over higher hurdles. Maraming salamat, Ginoong Pangulo, at pagpalain tayong lahat ng ating Panginoong Diyos.
Thank you very much to the chairman of the Committee on Higher Education. And well, definitely, Senator Joel, this is a shared vision. It's not only my vision and the vision of the Committee on Basic Education, but also the vision of Senator Joel and the Committee on Higher Education, as well as Senator Pia, who contributed immensely yesterday. We conducted 2 hearings and in which Senator Joel participated heavily, and in fact, a lot of the data that was used to craft this law came from him and his team. And we also conducted 6 TWGs at this time, in which the team of Senator Joel and Senator Pia also participated heavily. And let me just thank various stakeholders, but put emphasis on the Philippine Normal University, who spearheaded the passage of this bill. It started when they explained to the Office of the President the grave issues surrounding our surrounding our teachers and teacher education, and then that explanation went through various consultations, and at the end, they crafted the legislation that is needed in order to make sure that our teachers are put in focus. So this bill is all about teachers, Mr. President, and we will make sure that not only we address the needs of our teachers through salaries and other support services, but most importantly, their education. The 4 years they spend in college will be worthwhile in terms of delivering what the country needs in terms of development and in terms of learning outcomes. So again, just to put emphasis, at the heart and soul of this bill are the teachers, and this bill will put focus on how they will be educated and succeedingly how they will be trained. That's what Senator Joel mentioned earlier during their in-service experience. And then we will make this bill aims to make the teacher life continuum seamless, from college to their experience in basic education and their experience in teaching, as well as moving forward in their pursuit of lifelong learning. So it will be seamless from day one all the way to lifelong learning. So thank you very much, Senator Joel, for your participation and for that very inspiring manifestation. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, just a quick manifestation.
Senator Tolentino is recognized.
Mr. President, perhaps I just overheard yesterday the debates between the good gentleman and Senator Cayetano. I'm very supportive of this bill. My only concern, I hope I'm mistaken, I heard something about if you're a teacher of chemistry, you should have a background on chemistry, you should have studied chemistry, and you should have taught chemistry before, among others. If you're a teacher of biology, you must have a degree in biology, among others. Is that the correct focusing and prioritization of this?
But the conversation focus yesterday was specialization. And when we were conducting our consultation, and this is, I have to disclose, this is purely anecdotal, not supported by hard evidence. But the concept there is learners learn better, and their appreciation of the complicated subject matters such as math, chemistry, physics, when the teacher specialized in that during their college days. So meaning if the teacher took up, let's say, physics, and then took up another 18 courses of education so that that person will become a teacher, the outcome in terms of learning outcomes of the student is much deeper, and the appreciation is much greater because the teacher, in effect, has deeper knowledge on that subject matter.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to be clarified, and perhaps there should be a reconsideration of this. There are other allied sciences that probably can encapsulate related teaching strands. And I'm fully supportive of what the good gentleman said, agreeing that teaching is a profession that teaches all other professions. Congratulations to
Thank you.
the good sponsor.
Thank you, Senator Francis. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, can I just add, just to clarify?
Yes, Senator Cayetano is recognized.
Thank you, with the permission of the gentleman. To address Senator Francis' concern, that discussion emanated when I asked how are they encouraging non-teaching professionals to join the teaching professions. And the example I gave would be mothers, or those who had previously practiced their profession, and then now they either have they're full-time mothers or fathers, or they have a business that runs by itself and they have free time. how do you encourage them to join the teaching profession? And that's where Senator Gatchalian, the sponsor, mentioned that actually magagaling yung mga katulad niyan. Yun lang naman yung context nun. There was no intention on either of our parts to say na the requirement has to be you have to practice. It was simply acknowledging that these professionals may and should be encouraged to also join the teaching profession with to support them and not to have so many requirements. Let them have the basic. And I think His Honor said the requirement is something like 18 units of teaching courses and they'll be allowed. Yun lang naman po, to put it in context. Thank you.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. And with the permission of the sponsor and author, if I can also be made a co-author and co-sponsor of this measure. I totally believe in the advocacy of my two colleagues, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian and Senator Joel Villanueva, on education, and the only way to do that is teachers' education and training, so we can give out quality education to our students, Mr. President. Parang ano lang yan, di ba? Garbage in, garbage out. If we have an excellent setup, we will also have excellent students, I'm sure. So with that, Mr. President, I move that we close the period of interpellation on Senate Bill number 2152.
Any objection? Hearing none, period of interpellation is closed.
To allow our colleagues, I believe there is an arrangement between Senator Pia Cayetano and Senator Sherwin and other members, other colleagues who want to propose amendments. I move that we suspend consideration of the measure while we are on break. Possibly they can have an exchange of ideas, and we get back, we can tackle this once again. So I move to suspend, Mr. President, consideration.
All right, any objection? Hearing none, consideration is suspended.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, on Senate Bill, on the second item of the agenda, Senate Bill number 2214, this is the postponement of the Barm elections in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao. I believe our dear colleague, Senator Ping Lacson of Cavite, is still waiting for a meeting to being arranged for the leadership of Barm and this office. I would strongly encourage the leadership of Barm. I had actually asked them to log on today to watch the session in our feed, the live feed, because I would strongly encourage and appeal to the Barm leadership that once the lockdown is over, to set a meeting with Senator Lacson so that they can discuss issues that are important as well to our dear colleague from Cavite. And it would be of the best interest for everyone as well, so that these questions can be answered on the floor once that meeting has transpired. And also, Mr. President, I hope that's satisfactory to our colleague from Cavite. And also, Mr. President, for our other colleagues' concerns about the COMELEC preparation for such action or non-action. Therefore, Mr. President, may I ask the Secretariat to invite the chairman of the COMELEC or the commissioners in charge of this endeavor to our next date of session, which I believe is August, I don't have a calendar, August 24? August 23 is a Monday. No? So on Monday, Mr. President, if they can attend the session, we could suspend the rules with the permission of our colleagues and allow them to put on record the real situation of what would happen, whether we postpone or not postpone the Barm elections. I think that would be for the benefit of all our colleagues, Mr. President, and then we can move forward from there. We can make a decision, what to do next, what will be the next steps to be able to complete the process of this measure. And I hope that this is all right with the good chairperson of the committee. Will the good chairperson of the committee agree with me, Mr. President? Because of course he's the sponsor of the said measure.
Mr. President, as the chair of the committee,
Yeah, good.
yes, Mr. President, as the chair of the committee, let this be placed on record that your chairman is ready and willing to continue with the sponsorship and interpellation, but I concur with the suggestion of the good majority leader that there should be a time given for Senator Lacson, my kababayan, and some Barm ministers to sit down to iron out the kinks and other details that probably led to this impasse, bearing in mind, Mr. President, that when we resume on August 23, Mr. President, we barely have 39 days. The COMELEC has 39 days to craft the necessary procedures, the rules, print the ballots, and all other allied administrative exercises for the Barm elections. But I totally agree with the majority leader that this impasse going to the ECQ should be taken advantage of by my kababayan, Senator Lacson, and the Barm leadership to sit down and to iron out some conflicting, some issues that perhaps would pave the way for a better, clearer resolution of this measure. Salamat po, Mr. President.
Yes, just to add, Mr. President.
Yes.
We are in a unique situation because, of course, we spoke to those who are in favor from our colleagues as well as those who are pushing for this advocacy to postpone, that we will take it as soon as possible time and tackle it and vote on it. However, the pandemic has struck with a vengeance. The Delta variant is attacking everyone, even those who are vaccinated, Mr. President, and the President called for a lockdown. Kung wala lang po tayong lockdown, tuloy-tuloy po ang diskusyon nito, just to let our colleagues know and to those listening from other areas, that priority po natin ito. As a matter of fact, let it not be said that it is not in my agenda every day. Nasa agenda ko po ito every day. Pero ano pong magagawa natin, Mr. President? Natamaan po tayo ng lockdown, ECQ, at hindi pala talaga tayo makagalaw. No matter what we can do, we can't really force our staff to come to work at the time of this ECQ. So, Mr. President, this is the time where we have a chance, where they have a chance, Mr. President, to discuss issues with our dear colleague from Cavite. I think that would be a great opportunity for them to do so. And then that is why I commit to my chairperson, our chairperson, that on August 23, when we resume the session on that Monday, we can put that as first item on the agenda, inviting the COMELEC to be our resource persons, Mr. President, at that time. So I make an appeal again, Mr. President, I hope it was approved by the body, that we invite the COMELEC to come on August 23. We send an invitation to them and suspend our rules to set the committee of the whole so we can ask questions directly to the COMELEC, particularly on this issue of the Barm elections. Maraming salamat po, Mr. President.
Thank you, Majority Leader. Senator Lacson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to clarify matters, it was the Barm leadership that requested for an audience with me. So it was set at 1:30 today. Unfortunately, they called up to inform my office that they're still in Cotabato. So the meeting did not push through, but I commit to finish my interpellation in 1 day, 2 days tops, Mr. President. So just to assure the majority leader that there's no intention to delay the interpellation on this particular measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right.
Maraming salamat po, Mr. President. We appreciate the support our colleagues giving to this measure. And that's why we extend it, because I know there's no, on our part, on the Senate, there's no wish to delay this measure. It's just that we want to make sure all the issues are answered and clarified. And that is why I also insisted that they meet with a good gentleman from Cavite so that he can also share his thoughts with the leadership of the Barm. And also that we can get clarification from the COMELEC. Then we can move forward from there, Mr. President. We can discuss it. So maraming salamat po, Mr. President. We just asked the Secretariat, through our Senate Secretary, to issue the invitation to the leaders of the COMELEC as well for August 23. So moving forward, Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of may I ask for 1 minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session suspended.
President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2234 under Committee Report number 264.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of 2234 is in order.
Mr. President, we recognize our distinguished colleague, Senator Joel Villanueva, and to interpolate Senator Panfilo Ping Lacson.
Senator Joel Villanueva, the sponsor, is recognized, and to interpolate Senator Ping Lacson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. This is our third set of interpellation, and your chair of the Committee on Labor and Human Resource Development is now ready to entertain questions from our dear colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. President. This will be very brief, and we will distinguished sponsor yield to some clarificatory questions.
Gladly, Mr. President, Your Honor, we will do our best to answer the questions of our idol Lodi of the Senate, Mr. President.
Thank you, Your Honor. As a preliminary statement, a department or an office for that matter can only be as good as its personnel. And the personnel of that office can only be efficient with the support of resources.
Definitely.
That said, Mr. President, I will just focus my interpellation on the resources that will be made available to the to be created department, Mr. President. And do you think that's a logical or sound proposition, Mr. President? That without resources, there can be no performance on the part of the personnel.
Definitely, Mr. President. I cannot agree more with the statements made by the distinguished gentleman from Cavite. I agree with him completely, 100%, Mr. President.
Thank you, distinguished sponsor. Yeah, I understand that some or appropriations for several items under the Department of Labor and Employment, under the 2021 GAA, are being proposed to be transferred along with the agencies and functions of the present DOLE to the soon-to-be created department. Is that correct, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, to name a few, Mr. President, the heart of the department would be the transfer of POEA or Philippine Overseas Employment Administration, which is currently under the Department of Labor and Employment. Another agency, Mr. President, is the Philippine Overseas Labor Offices or POLO, and then a big chunk of the International Labor Affairs Bureau or ILAB, and the National Maritime Polytechnic or NMP, which are all under currently under with the Department of Labor and Employment.
Thank you. A call from the GAA of 2021. The following are the appropriations, related to the agencies to be transferred. POEA, how much is the budget under the POEA under the present DOLE, Mr. President?
Under
2021.
For 2021 appropriations, distinguished colleague, gentleman from Cavite, the appropriations for 2021 for POEA is 507,761,000. That is without the RLIP, yung retirement po. Pag sinama ho natin yun, that's 550,654,000. Yun po yung budget appropriations with RLIP and continuing appropriation po yan for 2021.
Yes, considering that we are in the third quarter of the present calendar year, I suppose, or it is safe to assume that part of this budget has already been obligated or disbursed. So how much is left under the budget of POEA, Mr. President?
Thank you for that question, and thank you for giving me a heads up yesterday, Mr. President. We communicated and asked the different agencies of the government. POEA actually gave us their latest figure as a remaining budget as of June 30, 2021, and I'm showing it right now in our screen, Mr. President, distinguished colleague. Right now, as of June 30, 2021, the remaining budget is 256,967,000, Your Honor.
Thank you for that response, Mr. President. How about the protection of the rights and promotion of welfare of overseas Filipinos, Mr. President? I understand there's no budget under or budget specific to the Office of the Undersecretary for Migrant Workers, Migrant Workers Affairs under the DFA. But there's an item, it is the nomenclature of the item is protection of the rights and promotion of welfare of overseas Filipinos, with an appropriation of 1.259 billion pesos, Mr. President. So, again, yung Commission on Filipino Overseas, that's 152,639,000 pesos. Yung entire budget of the OWA, 7.599 billion. Ito considered, but there's no specific item under the budget for the National Reintegration Center for OFWs, yung NC or NRC.
NRCO, Mr.
Yeah.
President, yes.
So ang tanong ko, Mr. President, is how does the proposed measure reconcile all the gaps and the unclear appropriations for these items under the current 2021 budget?
Well, thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleague. To just clarify, the Office of the Undersecretary for Migrant Workers Affairs, which is under the Department of Foreign Affairs, has a total budget of 1.2 billion for 2021. And as of June 30, 2021, the remaining budget is 1,072,880,000. Just to break down the 1.2 billion appropriated for 2021, 1 billion is being used for assistance to National Fund, and the 200 million is being used as a legal assistance fund, Mr. President. Now, to the question of the transferring of existing funds to the proposed department, I'll try to answer it, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, by first stating or quoting Section 42, Chapter 5 of Book 6 of Executive Order Number 292, or the Adjustment of Appropriations for Reorganization. It states that when under authority of law, a function or an activity is transferred or assigned from one agency to another, the balances of appropriations, which are determined by the head of such department to be available and necessary to finance or discharge the function or activity so transferred or assigned, may, with the approval of the President, be transferred to and be made available for use by the agency to which said function or activity is transferred or assigned for the purpose of which said funds were originally available. Yung balances po so transferred shall be credited to any applicable existing appropriation account or to new appropriation accounts which are hereby authorized, Mr. President, to be established and shall be merged with any fund in the applicable existing or newly established appropriation account or accounts, and thereafter accounted for as one fund, Mr. President.
So even if the appropriations under the 2021 budget is with the Department of Foreign Affairs, there will be no problem if we transfer the said funds to the newly created department.
Yes, Mr. President.
That's so stated in the
Yes.
Measure.
Yes, Mr. President. But let me also point out, Mr. President, that out of the budget, for instance, where the distinguished gentleman from Cavite made mention, the Office of Undersecretary for Migrant Workers Affairs, yung pong 1.2 billion, currently they are using these funds, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, doon po sa mga offices without POLO or OWA. At this time, there are about 60 posts po yan. So, pagka nabuo po yung departamento, wala pa rin po kasi yan. So, ang transition po is that the Department of Foreign Affairs is requesting that they need at least yung 300 million maiwan po muna sa kanila as transition as we transition to this new department para ho masiguro natin na hindi mapuputol at magtutuloy-tuloy po yung serbisyong mabibigay natin sa ating mga kababayan, lalong-lalo na doon po sa 60 offices na wala pong POLO or OWA unit, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. One particular issue that was raised by migrant workers, particularly, and I suppose you also received this letter from them, from the different organizations, from Hong Kong, Macau, Malaysia, Singapore, and Kuwait. Ang sabi nila, hindi raw sila nakonsulta. And their main concern, one of their concerns, is the repurposing of the OWA fund as a provident trust fund to be used exclusively for retirement, death, and disability benefits of OFWs. Ang sabi nila, kung ililimit if it is repurposed, exclusively for retirement, death, and disability, paano ibang concerns ng mga OFWs? Like yung pati sa families, etc., etc.
It will continue, Mr. President. In fact, Mr. President, first of all, let me spread into the records that we had several hearings, meetings, and consultations, Mr. President. There was a time that I have to stay for 7 hours, Mr. President, consulting from 48 countries of the world, Mr. President, about this particular measure. But let me point out the provisions that we are introducing in this particular measure when it comes to the use of OWA funds, Mr. President. First of all, we wanted to secure itong OWA funds, maprotektahan po natin. For instance, dito sa mga repatriation programs na ginagamit natin, ito pong OWA funds, medyo peculiar po ito, hindi po ito pondo ng pamahalaan, ito po ay private funds, ito po ay contribution ng ating mga kababayan at hanggat maaari ayaw natin na matatouch ito, magagalaw po ito. Kaya even Senator Frank Drilon, our minority floor leader who is also with us, can attest to this, that what we want is to ensure na maprotektahan po natin yung paggamit nitong pondo na ito at yun nga po yung ini-introduce natin, magkaroon ng trust fund para nang sa ganoon ay mabigyan natin ng tulong yung ating mga kababayan, lalong-lalo na yung mga nag-contribute po dito sa ating OWA funds.
So which fund will be used for the services currently funded by the OWA fund, Mr. President, if it's now limited to just 3 items?
OWA po yung may nag-handle niyan, Mr. President, yung pong trust fund nila, yun po yung binabanggit natin. And then yung proposal po ng ating mga kasamahan dito sa Senado ay, for example, meron po mga repatriation na programs, wag na po sanang galawin yung OWA funds at tayo naman taon-taon nag-allocate ng pondo para sa ating OWA para to ensure na magtuloy-tuloy po yung serbisyo sa ating mga kababayan.
So the repurposing would not include the contribution from our workers.
Yes, that's the idea, Mr. President.
Okay,
Yes.
so it will just be handled by DIGA.
Yes,
by
Mr.
the
President.
government.
Yes,
Thank
Mr.
you for that clarification, Mr. President. Before I proceed, Mr. President,
Let me give honor to whom honor is due because the minority floor leader is the one pushing for this, and we really appreciate his initiative in this particular amendment, Mr. President.
okay, that's amply clarified, Mr. President. Now, I noticed under Section 3, I believe, definition of terms, mukhang hindi nasama yung, well, before that, what's the difference between an OCW and an OFW?
Let me point out, Mr. President, thank you for that question. Under the proposed bill, a migrant worker or an overseas Filipino worker refers to a Filipino who is to be engaged, is engaged, or has been engaged in a remunerated activity outside of the Philippines, whether land-based po siya or sea-based. Now, meanwhile, an overseas Filipino refers to a Filipino who is outside of the Philippines, whether permanent or temporary, documented or undocumented. Example po, yung mga OFWs and their families living with them now dun sa isang host country, yung mga turista, yung pong mga pilgrims natin, students, yung pong ating mga trainees, and even religious missionaries, Mr. President. They are part of overseas Filipinos, Mr. President.
How about an overseas contract worker, Mr. President? There's nothing under the section. There's no mention of OCW. And an OCW is definitely an OFW.
Yes.
But an OFW may not necessarily be an OCW, because an OCW, an overseas contract worker, refers to an overseas Filipino worker who is covered by a contract, no?
Yes.
To work within a definite period of time. So, at the proper time, siguro pwedeng isama natin sa definition of terms yung OCW. Because
Sure.
an OFW, hindi naman lahat ng OFW o hindi lahat ng OFW OCW. Is that a correct statement, Mr. President?
First of all, Mr. President, let me spread into the records that this representation would welcome any amendment that will be proposed by the distinguished gentleman from Cavite. I personally know him very well, and he means well with all his noble intention of perfecting this particular measure. But just the same, Mr. President, let me also spread into the records that it is the same as a migrant worker, an overseas Filipino worker, overseas contract worker, as we have specifically made mention of the one being engaged or has been engaged in a remunerated activity outside of the country. Thank you.
Mr. President, Mr. President, just, Mr. President,
Minority Leader, go ahead.
just for the record, I happen to know the change from overseas contract workers to overseas Filipino workers. It was during my time as Secretary of Labor that this was changed. And the reason for this, Mr. President, is that when we say overseas contract workers, it is more restrictive and would refer only to those workers who would leave the country under a definite contract for a specific period of time. The change in nomenclature was a policy decision to change it to overseas Filipino workers, so that regardless of whether one is covered by the contract or not, he is an overseas Filipino worker entitled protection under our laws. That, just for the record, that was the reason why the original phrasing of overseas contract workers was changed to overseas Filipino workers. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to our distinguished minority floor leader for the enlightenment. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I will not argue with the former Secretary of Labor, Mr. President. But ang point ko lang is, tulad ng sinabi ko kanina, an OFW may not necessarily be an OCW, because there's a difference between the two. Ang OCW, medyo specific na covered ng contract, and as the minority leader mentioned, working, yung contract niya covered lang a specific period of time. But an OFW may not necessarily fall under that category. So parang just to clarify, there's no harm done if we include under
I
the
agree.
definition of terms, the nomenclature OCW.
I was about to say that, Your Honor, distinguished colleague, that there'll be no problems in mentioning in the definition of terms, Mr. President, the thoughts and ideas coming from the distinguished gentleman from Cavite.
Thank you, Mr. President. And since, as mentioned earlier, there's a total of 9.773 billion, proposed to be transferred to the new department from the DOLE, and or whatever is left of it, Mr. President, because third quarter na nga. And DOLE has only a 2021 appropriations of 36.61 billion pesos. So does it mean that since we are transferring the appropriations to this new department, proposed new department, the DOLE will now suffer losses in their appropriations? So 36 billion minus 9.7, so easily that's 27 billion ang maiwanan.
Mr. President, if I may, and may I ask our staff to flash on screen the budget that we wanted to present. Yung pong OWA funds will not be transferred because yung OWA po ay will just be an attached agency. So the 7 or 8 billion, Mr. President, that you are seeing on screen, or the 12.7 billion na kasama ho yung sa retirement, ay hindi po makakasama yan doon sa total budget that will be transferred to the new department. In fact, Mr. President, itong 8 agencies na nakalista po at pina-flash natin sa screen, POEA, OMWA, CFO, POLO, ILAB, NRCO, NMP, and ISSO from the Department of DSWD, yan po yung masasama yung 2.336 billion pesos, Mr. President. Yan po yung masasama doon po sa bagong budget ng ating bagong departamento na pinopropose.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. President. Now, again, the bill proposes the creation of the Migrant Workers and Overseas Filipinos, MWOF, office to serve as the operating arm of the department overseas. Now, how will this new office be different from the current POLO, yung ATN units of the DFA? Okay, in what way can this new office be able to provide improved services to safeguard the welfare of our migrant workers, Mr. President?
Thank you, Mr. President. This will be integrated, Mr. President. There will be a Department of Migrant Workers and Overseas Filipinos office in our posts. Hanggat maaari, malagyan po natin lahat. But of course, that is the ideal, Mr. President, and hopefully in the coming years, malagyan po natin. At i-integrate po dito, Mr. President, yung pong, if you recall, yung pinasa po natin noon na additional social welfare attaché sa mga post, yung pong POLO, i-integrate din po dyan. At i-integrate din po itong Assistance to National Office, Mr. President.
ATN.
But at the same time, Mr. President, I think it is important to note that at the end of the day, we will continue to comply with the one country team approach, Mr. President. So talagang yung ambassador pa rin po natin yung head noong embahada natin. At when it comes to migrant workers and overseas Filipinos, dun lang po papasok itong DOMWOF office.
And the new office will continue to empower yung mga migrant workers.
Yes, definitely, Mr. President. That's what we want. We just don't want to continue the services, but also improve, Mr. President, the services for our overseas Filipino workers and overseas Filipinos.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will not prolong anymore my interpellation. And rest assured that this representation is in full support of the measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President na talaga yung tatawag ko. First presidential candidate to support this measure, Mr. President. I'm so happy and honored. Thank you.
Mr. President, alam nyo, miracles can happen. And, you know, all that I can say right now is remember the time and the date when the distinguished gentleman from Bulacan mentioned that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
That will be prophetic, Mr. President.
Yes.
As long as he's
Just-
running late, we make
And I hope that the distinguished gentleman from Cavite will not forget this representation.
And we also hope that his running mate makes it as well.
Definitely, Mr. President.
Sige, sa susunod na lang. Mr. President,
Mr. President.
next to interpolate is our good friend, Senator Francis Kiko Pangilinan.
Senator Francis Pangilinan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Majority Leader. Mr. President, Mr. Majority Leader, distinguished sponsor, this representation is neither a presidentiable nor a vice presidentiable. I'm more of a vegetable farmer, Mr. President, and would like to advocate vegetable farming and agriculture. But having said that, Mr. President, will the distinguished sponsor allow this vegetable farmer to raise a few questions?
Gladly, Mr. President, it will be a great honor and privilege for this representation to do his best in answering the questions coming from our dear colleague. And I have yet to mention this, Mr. President. I've been in the Senate for almost 6 years now. We have been together we have known each other for about 24 years, Mr. President. The gentleman, Senator Kiko Pangilinan, is our partner at the 88 store in Boston, Mr. President. Thank you.
That is correct. We were together studying in Boston and Cambridge 24 years ago.
And it's
Uh,
unbelievable, Mr. President, that no one, I think, none of us would ever think that we will be together in this great institution. Thank you, and again, I am delighted to answer any questions coming from our distinguished colleague.
Yeah, thank you very much to the birthday celebrant. Mr. President, to proceed, this representation has been a staunch promoter of agriculture development. We believe jobs here
Yes.
should be created so that our citizens precisely need not go abroad, be separated from their families, and easily the data will show and research will show that the cheapest or the least expensive job creation would be in the agriculture sector. Investments in agriculture will create more jobs at a lower cost compared to other sectors, whether it's manufacturing and the like. And therefore, immediately, job creation becomes easily achievable when we promote local creation of jobs. And that's why I raised this concern or this issue precisely because I understand that the sponsor in his in his sponsorship speech rather reiterated that it is not the policy of the state to promote overseas employment as a means to sustain economic growth. Is that not right?
Yes, Mr. President. Thank you for bringing this up, Mr. President. I think it is very important. First things first, it is in our declaration of policy that the state policy is not changing at all, Mr. President, and that we believe that the most important thing still is to create jobs here, domestically, here in our country, so that we will not be forcing anyone, especially our kababayans, to leave the country for greener pastures. And we are hoping someday, Mr. President, that we'll be able to attain that dream, that our kababayans will only live abroad or to go to another country as a matter of choice and
Yes.
not a matter of Mr. President being forced to go out and look for greener pastures. Let me also take this opportunity, Mr. President, distinguished colleague. In this particular measure, we place in Section 28 a congressional review that will take place after 10 years from the effectivity of this act or as the need arises, Mr. President. And then after that, 5 years after, we can still review, Mr. President. And another thing, Mr. President, is that there will be a congressional oversight committee which may conduct and review the measure at any given time.
Yes, we will raise some questions on Section 28 later on.
Okay.
Mr. President, may we get the information from the good sponsor? How much does a overseas Filipino worker, what is the range of monthly income that compels him or her to leave the country and earn this particular amount abroad? Would you have the figures? What would be the lowest or what would be the average monthly income that pushes our kababayans to leave their families and therefore face the exploitation, face the oppression, even the abuses and the cultural differences in other countries?
Okay. Mr. President, we have here with us the administrator of OWA, and according to him, Mr. President, for a example, for a service provider, domestic worker, Mr. President, they can easily get about, on the average, $400. But for professionals, Mr. President, it ranges from at least 1,000 to 3,000 US dollars a month, Mr. President. And you could
Yes.
just
So,
imagine,
yes.
Mr. President, the bright future that awaits to our overseas Filipino workers leaving the country, and that's why perhaps that's the main reason why they have this desire, even to the point of sacrificing being
Yes.
away from their loved ones.
Yes, as head of TESDA for 6 years, Mr. President, distinguished sponsor, I'm sure you are familiar, with the incomes, the salaries, how do you call it? Salary grade pay of various sectors. Am I not right? I mean, you have a general familiarity with the various pays locally.
Yes, Mr. President. Average, Mr. President, they would comply with the minimum wage requirement, Mr. President. In fact,
Yes.
even during the time when we were at the helm of Technical Education and Skills Development Authority, a lot of our scholars and students would actually dream of going abroad. For instance, Mr. President, I remember our welders who wanted to graduate immediately and work immediately abroad because some of them, for instance, I remember would get about 200,000 pesos a month salary abroad, and that's why they're looking forward, Mr. President, to leave the country after they finish their technical vocational education.
That is, yes. So the range would be anywhere between, ballpark figure of 20,000 pesos a month
Yes.
to around 150,000 pesos a month for our overseas workers. Is that not right? Yes.
No,
I mean, that is,
for those abroad.
yes.
Yes, Mr. President, you are correct. Yes.
Okay. Now, the data submitted to us by the Department of Agriculture, for example, is that the average income of a farmer would be around 6,000 pesos a month. And therefore, if you are a farmer and you're earning 6,000 pesos a month, and you have this opportunity to earn, or your family or your wife has the opportunity to earn 3 times more, which is 20,000 pesos a month in Hong Kong, that definitely would be a major factor in your decision to leave, would it not?
Yes, Your Honor. I would imagine, Mr. President, distinguished colleague.
Who would not be tempted to earn 3 times more, di ba?
Definitely,
Elsewhere,
Mr. President.
even if it means being separated from your family. I say this because assuming that we are able to double or maybe more than double the income of our farmers, sabihin na natin umabot na ng 12 to 15,000 pesos a month, hindi ba? Do you think the 20,000 pesos a month would still be as how do you call it, as interesting to a farmer if he's already earning anywhere between 15 perhaps to almost 20,000 pesos a month?
I am not sure, Mr. President, if I would be able to answer that question in such a way that I cannot say the situation or be in that particular position, Mr. President. Perhaps that would depend on the situation of any Tom, Dick, or Harry o kababayan po natin na tumitingin dito. But I am certainly with the distinguished gentleman na kung malapit, Mr. President, at hindi ganong kalayo, I would rather stay at home. I would rather
Yes.
stay with my family, Mr. President,
Yes.
and loved
Well,
ones.
in other words, my point here is that kahit hindi naman eksakto o lampas, pero wag namang masyadong malayo ang kinikita dito sa ating bansa. Magdadalawang isip na ang ating mga kababayan na mag-ibang bansa dahil mahihiwalay sa pamilya, haharap sa mga abusong amo, etc., hindi ba?
I certainly agree, Mr. President, distinguished colleague. You look at
And
the
this is yes. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. President, I would just like to point out that the latest unemployment rate, latest June of 2021 is 7.7%, and you have 14.2% underemployment rate. And if you would recall, distinguished colleague, in year 2020, the annual unemployment rate is in double figures. It's 10.3%. In fact, we reached noong pong April 2020, we reached 17.6% unemployment rate. And so if that is the situation, definitely, Mr. President, you would consider working abroad and
Yes.
shoot for the stars.
Yes, and my point
Reconnect.
5,000.
sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Go ahead.
Thank you. We support the manifestation in the sponsorship speech of Senator Villanueva that the state ought not to and does not promote overseas employment as a means to sustain economic growth and achieve national development. But and having manifested that earlier, Mr. Sponsor, can we just make it just to clarify, because we do not promote overseas employment as a means to sustain economic growth, may we be clarified as to the main reason behind the establishment of the Department of Overseas of Migrant Workers?
Yes, Mr. President, thank you for that. We have currently experiencing a lot of problems and challenges besetting our overseas Filipino workers, even our overseas Filipinos, Mr. President. You have illegal recruitment, for instance, and in this particular measure, we wanted to have full regional offices in the different administrative regions. And in these administrative offices, we wanted to house the interagency one-stop shop centers for OFWs. And we also wanted, in addition to that, the regional offices will each have an adjudication officer, Mr. President. With regard to the problems of red tape, we wanted to put one department for all the services for OFWs and overseas Filipinos to remove paper chase for various transactions and delivery of assistance. When it comes to different and confusing regulations, Mr. President, we wanted to have one department that has a sole authority to administer and enforce regulations. When it comes to response in case of emergencies, Mr. President, if you would recall in our committee of the whole hearing, we have been getting different figures from DFA, from DOLE, from OWA. Iba-iba ho yung figures na mga nare-repatriate at dumarating na Filipinos. At pagka po may repatriation, yung DFA po ang in charge pagka undocumented, pero ang DOLE in charge pag documented. So ito wala na, mas magiging malinaw yung repatriation, response to emergencies. This measure also would like to mandate the department to establish a 24/7 emergency response and action center and media and social media monitoring center to respond to the emergency needs of our overseas Filipino workers and overseas Filipinos and their families. And last but not the least, Mr. President, yung pong reintegration, which I think is very important. Under Section 17 of this measure, the department shall develop and implement yung pong full cycle and comprehensive national reintegration program. It will be embedded in all stages of migration for work, from the beginning, from pre-deployment, on-site, during employment, and upon return, whether voluntary or involuntary. Thank you,
Yes.
Mr. President.
In other words, we recognize there are challenges in the existing situation regarding overseas employment that need to be addressed. But we are not giving up on that one day we will have the job generation locally.
Yes,
And that
definitely.
the serious problems of exploitation, of abuse, of discrimination, of the social cost of being separated from their families will be a thing of the past.
Definitely, Mr. President. I join the distinguished gentleman for pointing it out. At the end of the day, it's best for our government to keep on creating jobs domestically. But right now, we are aware that our kababayans would live abroad for greener pastures, and hindi naman natin sila pinipigilan, Mr. President. It's just that again, the ultimate dream natin lahat ay dumating yung araw na aalis lamang yung ating mga kababayan dahil choice po nilang umalis at hindi po sila napipilitang umalis.
And as you mentioned earlier, precisely, you have Section 28, the
Yes.
oversight and a 10-year timetable within which the oversight may recommend the abolition of this department, precisely because
Yes.
we do not support, the policy of exporting our labor, because we would rather have our labor gainfully employed in the country where our economy is robust, dynamic, and hitting, double-digit growth, for lack of, as something we envision. Is that not right?
Yes, Mr. President, I cannot agree more with the statements of our dear colleague. You are correct,
Yes.
Mr. President.
And part precisely of a key component in the generation of jobs back home, or bringing back our overseas Filipinos to the motherland, and being gainfully employed here is critical. Yung reintegration, hindi po ba?
Yes. Yes, definitely, Mr. President, you are correct. Reintegration is a vital part of this measure, yes.
In other words, we envision that, if libre lang naman ang mangarap, in 10 years time, di ba? Maganda ng sitwasyon sa ating bansa. Masigla na ekonomiya, maraming job opportunities, marami doon sa ating mga kababayan na, if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned in the earlier interpellations, about millions, no, of overseas Filipinos working abroad will come back. Hindi po ba?
Yes, Mr. President.
I mean, that
That's
is
what we want,
envisioned.
Mr. President.
Yes.
Yes, Mr. President, and that's what we envision, Mr. President. In fact, for example, for our overseas Filipinos, Mr. President, even while they are living abroad, they can actually be part of nation building. They can become our tourism ambassadors. Some of them, perhaps, if I am sure there are Filipinos out there teaching in universities and colleges, perhaps from Ivy Leagues, Mr. President, who can also be tapped by our state universities and colleges where they can also teach, Mr. President. So that is our vision, Mr. President.
So apart from providing jobs for our labor force that grows 2% every year, so the local economy will have to absorb that labor force that enters the labor market 2% every year, and then the overseas Filipinos coming in too from abroad also will be reintegrated and absorbed by a robust, dynamic, double-digit growth economy. Yun yung ating vision, hindi po ba?
Definitely, Mr. President. Yes, despite the challenges that we are facing, especially right now in the midst of this pandemic.
Yes, and with respect to reintegration, perhaps, kasi ang nakita natin, kung ganun ang direksyon natin, no, eventually pauwi natin sila at mabibigyan sila ng sapat na trabaho rito. Siguro dapat unti-unting lumalaki itong reintegration budget, because right now, based on the earlier answers, I think it has the second lowest budgetary appropriations from all the agencies that are to be absorbed, no, so maybe we should look into moving forward, adding because precisely we want overseas, the bulk of our employment to be here and not abroad, and bring them back home here and reintegrate them. So dapat kung yun ang target, kinakailangan pondohan natin yung reintegration.
Agree, Mr. President. Agree with the distinguished gentleman, our dear colleague, Senator Pangilinan, especially of the fact that the reintegration program now will be more comprehensive and full cycle, Mr. President. So I definitely look forward in working with the distinguished gentleman in this particular item in the budget for next year, Mr. President.
Yes. And just a few more points on the mandatory review. Uh, this this is a sunset provision included because, and I quote, you're optimistic that there will be no more need for this department in the future, and that 10 years is a reasonable amount of time to evaluate the need to overhaul or abolish the department, should circumstances prove that its existence is no longer necessary. So this is also part of the intent, and this is the intent of legislation of Congress, is that we look to the day that we will abolish the department, precisely because the jobs are now available locally. The pay locally is likewise competitive. The compensation benefits are likewise vastly improved, and therefore people would rather stay and work here than go abroad. Tama po ba yun?
Yes, Mr. President, that is the intention of this representation and your committee here in the Senate. And Section 28 mandatory review also requires the Congressional Oversight Committee to undertake different functions, Mr. President. If we will be able to reach that level of success even before the 10-year period, Mr. President, we can already agree to perhaps stop or remedial legislation would be introduced, Mr. President, could be streamlined the functions, realign perhaps the mandates and services, right-size the department, and or perhaps strengthen more our migrant workers, overseas Filipinos offices in all of the foreign service posts. So these are the things that I would say possibilities, Mr. President, na po pwedeng mangyari.
And maybe the simplest would be to return the agencies to the Department of Labor,
Yes.
primarily,
Yes, Mr.
because
President.
precisely the challenges of overseas employment have greatly been reduced because of the robust, dynamic, economic boom that the country would be experiencing. Tama po ba yun?
Yes, Your Honor, distinguished colleague. Again, for example, the recommendation to abolish the department 10 years from its creation, should circumstances prove that there is no more need, as the distinguished gentleman, our dear colleague Senator Pangilinan, is saying that there's no more need for the existence of the department. So and so be it, Mr. President.
Yes. Perhaps during the period of amendment, Mr. President, if the good sponsor is willing, we would like to perhaps propose how to strengthen for example, Section 2C, to strengthen the domestic labor market, because that is precisely how,
Yes.
that will be the trigger to abolish this department, that the domestic labor market is finally able to absorb with
Yes.
with a competitive pay, those who would prefer to go overseas. So how to strengthen the domestic labor market, I think, should be part of the policy considerations and priorities, of this department. Maybe we can flesh this out during the period of amendments. Also,
Sure.
the matter of, this was raised to us, the matter of our commitments to binding international labor organization conventions and international treaties as a basis, to determine whether we are actually meeting our targets in terms of addressing the challenges of our overseas Filipino workers and the rights, the welfare issues affecting their welfare and their rights.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. We will be looking forward to working with our dear colleague, Senator Pangilinan, at the proper time, Mr. President. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And one last question on this was raised earlier by Senator Lacson. The DBM has said that about 1 billion, is that right, will be needed to establish this new department, but it will depend on the final setup. This is one of the
Yes.
how do you call it, inputs in the committee hearing.
Yes, during the hearing, Mr. President, the Department of Budget and Management made mention that there will be about 1.2 billion pesos needed to create this new department. But as mentioned earlier, Mr. President, and presented earlier with the body, yung pong budgets of these 8 existing government agencies will be lumped into one. And so indicative, Mr. President, I would say indicative, the remaining budget of agencies that will be transferred at least is 1.5 billion. So you're talking about saving about 420 million, Mr. President, as we streamline these government agencies. For example, you talk about administrative costs of all these agencies being flashed on screen. Imagine, Mr. President, it will be lumped into one. So isa na lamang yung administrative cost nila at makakatipid do ang ating pamahalaan.
Thank you for the clarification, Mr. President. I will end my interpellation as I began. Mr. President, I would really hope to see, and I reiterate that investments in agriculture will really create more jobs in the agriculture sector, and therefore overseas Filipinos wanting to go overseas will probably choose if there is better pay in the agriculture sector, for example, or manufacturing for that matter. And of late, in the last 10 years, the call center industry has allowed for competitive pay rather than having our kababayans leave for abroad. Tourism also, Mr. President, if we improve our tourism revenues and tourism arrivals after COVID, each tourist that arrives creates one new job locally and not abroad. So we support this measure with that understanding that in the end, the solution to the challenges facing our overseas Filipino workers is precisely that they need not leave and need not have to go abroad to find jobs, that the jobs would be made available here. With that, Mr. President, I'd like to thank the good sponsor for his answering a number of our questions, and we would like to end our interpellation. Maraming salamat, distinguished sponsor. Maraming salamat, Mr. Senate President, and to our colleagues and the Majority Leader. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator Kiko Pangilinan, for your valuable inputs and insights. And we are looking forward to working with you in perfecting this very important and landmark legislation. Maraming salamat po.
All right, Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President, to allow our colleagues to, I believe, Senator Tolentino would like to ask a few questions.
Mr. President,
Senator Tolentino,
Mr. President, with the permission of the very energetic sponsor, because I was able to save some time due to the sidetracking of the Barm bill, Mr. President. Just one question, Mr. President. I'm also very supportive of this measure. I'm one of the co-authors. This has something to do with human trafficking, Mr. President. Mr. President, an OFW group, several OFW groups reached out to my office, Mr. President. We had an online Zoom meeting several weeks ago, attended by OFWs, OFW organizations, and I promised them that this would be part of my sole question to the good gentleman from Bulacan. Mr. President, there have been previous instances when Filipino workers staying at the Philippine Embassy shelter, and this is a true story, Mr. President, in Damascus, were re-trafficked, quote unquote, to their employers, allegedly, with the help of several embassy personnel. And I'd like to mention the name of the Charge d'Affaires here involved, Vida Soraya Versosa, the country's top diplomat in Syria, said, and she's helping, said that the recall of some embassy personnel were largely due to allegations of involvement in human trafficking, Mr. President. So this is what happened in one instance, Mr. President. After securing the services of a Syrian lawyer, Versosa, our top diplomat, said they were able to get documents filed before the Syrian prosecutor's office over issues involving some organic personnel of the post, I'm referring to the DFA, as well as some local hires. She revealed that some of the wards were being retrafficked, Mr. President, or returned to their employers in exchange for a sum of money. For example, the Syrian local hire, they were saying, when I had meetings with the ministry, this is according to our top diplomat, that some of the embassy personnel were working with the illegal recruiters. That they were actually inducing the girls, Filipinas, to leave their employers and go to the embassy shelter. Then, quote unquote, and then upon signing a waiver, they will be returned back to their employers for a sum of money. Essentially, not only were they trafficked from the Philippines to Syria, they were being retrafficked from the embassy shelter and back to their employers or to a different employer, unquote. My question to the good sponsor is this: how can the newly created, supposed to be created a department prevent incidents such as this when the policy is absorption, incorporation of existing employees of current agencies? How can the creation of a new department strengthen the seemingly lack of confidence in government institutions? Hindi sa lahat. And given that the proposals that we've heard during several committee hearings, the WGs, were to absorb current employers from different agencies. Ano po yung safeguards natin dito kung we absorb them lock, stock, and barrel? Will there be a vetting process in terms of their rehiring, quote unquote, pursuant to civil service rules, as they will be part of a new department, Mr. President?
Thank you, Mr. President. The distinguished gentleman from Cavite, I will try to answer all his queries, Mr. President, lump into one big question, Mr. President. First of all, Damascus, as I was told by our friends from DFA, is in alert level 4, Mr. President. Wala din pong OWA at Polo doon, kaya po DFA yung nangangalaga sa kanila. And yung DFA po, Mr. President, ay hindi kasama sa mapupunta dito sa Department of Migrant Workers and Overseas Filipinos. Yun lamang pong function ng OMWA ang masasama po dito. If you recall, Mr. President, we have been talking about the access to national funds, and that's the main reason why the Department of Foreign Affairs is requesting that a chunk of this budget will not be transferred to the new department because they need this funding, Mr. President, especially in those areas like Damascus na wala pong polo at OWA. Now, isa ho dun sa mga binanggit natin kanina na feature nitong ating panukalang batas ay yung pagse-set up ng 24/7 na action center na kung saan makaka-access yung ating mga kababayan dito sa ating Department of Migrant Workers and Overseas Filipinos offices. At tungkol naman po doon sa partikular na kaso na binanggit ng ating kasamahan, the gentleman from Cavite, the case is under investigation right now. The administrative case is under investigation. We have with us some friends from DFA. Yusek Sara is here, Mr. President, and if the gentleman and some of our colleagues would want to have an executive session with our friends from DFA, they are gladly to orient us and give us updates with regard to that particular case, Mr. President. We cannot just divulge the identity, Mr. President, and some pertinent information here on the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I agree the difficulty being encountered by our government personnel, especially in war-torn Syria, Damascus, Aleppo, among others. So I'd rather have an executive meeting with the DFA personnel present here. But in general terms, Mr. President, it would appear, perhaps not all, during our Zoom meeting with various OFW groups, that they are raising concerns about some government agencies abroad abroad seemingly lack of seriousness in terms of addressing their concerns. That's why they are turning to NGOs, and we are referring to international non-government organizations helping migrant workers, not just for Filipinos, Bangladeshis, Indians, among others. So how would this new department, although we will not prevent that, how would this new department give that certain level of confidence that before you go to an international NGO, there is this newly created department. We are here to serve you. We are here. We are at your disposal. And with Section 14, your action fund, we can truly address your concern. How do we address this conundrum, Mr. President?
Well, I share the sentiment, Mr. President, of our distinguished colleague from Cavite, and that is why in this particular measure, Mr. President, we made mention about the training center and the fact that our employees that will be absorbed by this new department. First of all, Mr. President, we will be establishing a Department of Migrant Workers and Overseas Filipinos office in hopefully in all the posts, Mr. President, but I know it's going to take some time before we'll be able to establish all of that. But I think one of the major provision, Mr. President, is the training center that will be able to train our overseas officers, Mr. President, with regard to how best serve our kababayans abroad.
So the rehiring would require as a prerequisite a proper training, reorientation.
Definitely, Mr. President. Yes, you are correct, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I don't want to take too much time of the good sponsor. I know he's tired, and perhaps I would just make myself available in the fine-tuning of this bill, which I am also a co-author, with the proposal to underscore Section 25 that there should be a greater coordination with the Bangsamoro Ministry of Labor and Employment, considering that most of the host countries are Muslim countries in the Middle East. With that, Mr. President, I thank the good gentleman for answering my queries, and I still have to receive his assurance that a greater or perhaps turboed Section 25 would be in the offing during the period of amendments, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
We will be more than willing to accept and consider the would-be amendments coming from the distinguished gentleman from Cavite, but let me also point out that part of the measure is to put up regional office in Bangsamoro region, Mr. President, for this measure, Mr. President. So again, I'd like to thank the distinguished gentleman from Cavite for all his insights and very important information. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you,
All right,
distinguished
Majority Leader.
colleagues, Mr.
Yes.
President. To allow our colleagues to study this further, move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 223. So,
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration suspended.
moving forward, Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1156.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are in the period of interpellation. May we recognize Senator Amy Romualdez Marcos to sponsor and answer interpellators of the measure. Mr. President, we have no one lined up to interpolate this particular measure. However, I had a discussion with Senator Amy. There is a request by the sponsor, Mr. President. May we recognize the sponsor for her manifestation?
Yes, Mr. President.
Yes, Senator Marcos, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. For the purpose of expediting this priority measure, considering that the committee report was submitted early in November 2019, and for the better understanding of our colleagues here in this chamber, I urge that I be allowed to present committee amendments directly or perhaps a substitute bill, depending on your advisement. Given that the committee report was pre-create. It was long before create, and it does not take into consideration many concerns, for example, of our minority leader, that are already taken up by the Retail Trade Law or the upcoming Public Services Act. So I am recommending that the substitute bill, or if it is better procedure, to go straight to the committee amendments, during which all clarificatory state questions from our fellow senators will be entertained thoroughly.
Mr. President, the proper motion would be a amendment by substitution, wherein the committee can submit a new committee report, of course, incorporating the amendments given to her, our distinguished colleague, by our colleagues. She's absolutely correct in the approval of the create measure and other measures by this chamber, by Congress. We have technically updated her committee report. It's not necessary, for example, to come up with a new commission, as we already have created that under the create law. Sounding redundant. We had actually legislated it under the create law. Mr. President, may we recognize the good minority floor leader, Mr. President.
Senator
yes.
Rilon, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Yes, we recognize the quandary of the good sponsor. Indeed, the committee report here was prepared before we passed the create law. And therefore, many of the provisions here have been tackled, and we have in the create bill, and we have passed that bill. May I propose, Mr. President, for an orderly discussion with the consent of the chamber? We can terminate the period of interpellation. We can allow the committee to introduce the amendments. And of course, our understanding is that the chairman or the chair, the sponsor, will yield the floor to interpellations, continuous interpellations, but the questions now will be based on the substitute bill. That's our proposal. We repeat, Mr. President, because of this very peculiar circumstance, with the permission of the chamber, we, especially those who have manifested that they would want to interpolate, we can terminate the period of interpellation without objection from any member of the chamber, allow the committee to file a substitute bill, with the understanding that the members of the chamber who would wish to interpolate will be allowed to interpolate, but now on the basis of the substitute bill, Mr. President, because of the peculiar nature of this committee report. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I agree, Mr. President, totally with the manifestation of the good minority floor leader. The amendment actually is in nature of a substitute, just like what we had done in Sitira, Mr. President. If you can recall, in Sitira, we substituted to the create measure. So if that is the pleasure of our distinguished colleague from Ilocos Norte and Leyte
Yes.
to do so, is that correct, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President and Majority Leader, with the support of the Minority Leader, and if there are no objections from my colleagues here in this chamber, may I move therefore for the submission of a substitute bill, during which presentation all clarificatory questions will be entertained.
Yes, so what we could do, Mr. President, with the permission of the Minority Leader and our colleagues, we close the period of interpellation so that we can proceed to the period of amendment without prejudice from our colleagues asking questions, clarificatory questions, with the permission, of course, of our sponsor.
All right, Majority Leader and my dear colleagues, The parliamentary strategy, therefore, would be if it's an amendment in the nature of a substitution or a substitute bill, you strike the entire text of the bill after the enacting clause, and then the original bill's number will be retained.
Yes.
You know, that
That
is
is
the
correct.
procedure, and therefore the proposed new bill should be submitted to the Bills and Index.
That's correct, Mr.
That
President.
is the
It has to be
best
filed.
parliamentary strategy.
Yes, it has to be
Very much,
filed similar
Mr.
to create.
President. We will comply.
Yes,
All right.
so that we can be given a copy of the new substitute measure.
I heard Senator Marcos said she will comply. All right.
Thank you, Mr. President. Therefore, I so move.
Any objection? Hearing none. Period of interpellation is closed. And
We await.
the suggestion is
Yes.
that Senator Marcos follow this suggestion of the procedure that we manifested. All right.
Correct, Mr. President.
Thank you.
So with that, Mr. President, we move to suspend consideration of the measure.
Any objection? Hearing none. Consideration of the measures.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Order.
Before we take up the
Suspended.
next item on the agenda. Ready na ba? Ready na?
Hello.
May we recognize Senator, when asked for 1 minute suspend.
Ako nga tinatanong eh.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
No, we did not suspend. Go ahead.
Oh, my apologies. Mr. President, I move that we are in receipt of the Bicameral Conference Committee report on the discrete provisions of Senate Bill number 1832 and House Bill number 7406. This is the BFP Modernization Act. With the permission of the body, Mr. President, may we recognize the chairperson of the Senate panel, Senator De La Rosa, to give us highlights of the Bicameral Committee report, which later we can ask clarificatory questions.
Majority Leader, I think we will have to suspend first because it is not yet filed.
Huh?
We do not have a copy now.
Therefore, Mr. President, I withdraw
Just
my motion.
suspend for a few minutes and.
Oh, yes,
wait
instead of
for it.
withdrawing, I suspend for a few minutes.
All right, session is suspended for 1 Senate minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, once again, just to reiterate, we're in receipt of the Bicameral Conference Committee on the report of the disagreeing provisions of Senate Bill number 1832 and House Bill number 7406. This is the BFP Modernization Act. May we recognize Senator Ronald Bato de la Rosa to give us the highlights of this report.
Senator Ronald De La Rosa is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader. Good afternoon, Mr. President and colleagues. I have the honor of submitting for ratification the Bicameral Conference Committee report on the disagreeing provisions of Senate Bill number 1832 and House Bill number 7406, also known as the Bureau of Fire Protection Modernization Act. I am happy to report to this august body that in today's Bicameral Conference Committee meeting, all the Senate conferees were present and actively participated in our pursuit of the best reconciled version of the BFP Modernization Bill. At the outset, the body adopted the provisions and title of the bill, which were approved during the first Bicameral Conference Committee meeting last May 24, 2021, except for Section 4, Paragraph D of the Conference Committee report, which includes the establishment of the Security and Protection Unit, or SPU. As the chairman of the Senate panel, I manifested during the BICAM meeting the sentiment and concerns raised by the members of the Senate during the first attempt to ratify the reconciled bill on the establishment of BFP Security and Protection Unit. However, the House Conference still insisted with their proposal to establish the BFP Security and Protection Unit, or SPU. The Bicameral Conference Committee had a lengthy and extensive discussion regarding the creation and the composition of the Security and Protection Unit. Armed with the guidance from our Senate Majority Floor Leader, Senator Miguel Zubiri, the Senate panel through Senator Tolentino proposed an amendment to the proposal of the House Conference. We included in the bill the specific number of BFP personnel for SPU in order to limit the authority of the BFP on the issuance of short firearms. With this amendment, the Senate panel through Senator Hontiveros further amended the provision to ensure that those who will be appointed in SPU will be well trained to handle firearms. As such, all SPU members shall be required to undergo neuropsychological examination before their appointment to the unit, as well as periodic trainings. After the comprehensive deliberation, the Bicameral Committee approved the final reconciled bill that will guarantee not only the modernization of our country's firefighting authority, but also the welfare of every Filipino. Mr. President, I would like to thank Senators Tolentino and Gatchalian for sharing their learnings as former local chief executives, and for Senator Bongo for his experience in his involvement in extending assistance to fire-hit communities. Also for the invaluable intervention of Senator Hontiveros in ensuring that members of the SPU will be subject to strict qualifications, and in highlighting the importance of neuropsychological examination as a requirement. Mr. President, allow me also to thank the co-authors and co-sponsors of this bill, Senate President Vicente Soto III, Senate Pro Tempore Ralph Recto, Minority Leader Franklin Drilon, Majority Leader Miguel Zubiri, Senator Christopher Lawrence Go, Senator Bong Revilla, Senator Pia Cayetano, Senator Francis Tolentino, Senator Sani Angara, Senator Richard Gordon, Senator Grace Poe, Senator Manny Pacquiao, Senator Joel Villanueva, Senator Amy Marcos, Senator Cynthia Villar, and Senator Wayne Gatchalian. And to all my colleagues who have helped us to further improve this landmark mission. Mr. President, this proposed measure has nothing but good intentions for our firefighters and for the Filipino people. With the permission of the body, I move that the joint explanatory statement on the disagreeing provisions of Senate Bill number 1832 and House Bill number 7406 be read in toto into the record and that the Bicameral Conference Committee report be ratified. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat.
What does the majority leader say?
We'd like to recognize the minority floor leader, Mr. President. He's raised.
Senator, the minority leader, Senator Dillon, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Will the gentleman from Davao yield the floor to a few questions, clarificatory questions, both on the procedure and on the substance?
Yes, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sponsor, and I hope you will indulge me when I ask with the questions I will raise, because this is the first time, to be candid, this is the first time that we had a conference committee report which did not get the majority vote when it was presented to the chamber for ratification, and is again returned to us now with for ratification. So educate me, Mr. President. What is the procedure that was followed in order to enable the chamber to once more consider the BICAM report when that did not get the support of the chamber and in effect rejected when it was first presented to the body?
Mr. President, the members of the Bicameral Conference Committee were reconstituted by one minute suspension, Mr. President. 1 minute break.
Session suspended.
Yes, Mr. President, with the permission of the sponsor of the bicameral committee report, may I be allowed to present to the body the procedure that we followed. Last Monday, actually Tuesday after the State of the Nation address, we reconstituted the BICAM through a motion, which is also in our journal, and asking the president to designate the new bicameral conference committee members of this particular bill, Mr. President. As a matter of fact, I recall you agreed we agreed to it with the permission of the body, and then on the next day, I think Wednesday, or same day, you gave the exact names, Mr. President, and to
Yes, before the end of the session, I was
Yes.
reminded of the reconstitution of the BICAM Conference Committee, and therefore I
Yes.
redesignated the names that were mentioned earlier. I do recall that.
that was on Monday, August 2, Mr. President. It says to read, Senate conferees upon nomination of Senator Zubiri, there being no objection, the chair designated the following to reconstitute the Senate panel in the bicameral conference committee for the BFP Modernization Act of 2020. Senator De La Rosa as chairperson, Senators Tolentino, Go, Gatchalian, and Ontiveros as members. Then we adjourn, Mr. President.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. President. Yes, I wanted to spread that into the record because indeed, it is not very often that we witness in this chamber a BICAM report not getting the approval in plenary. And in fact, this is, I don't recall any other instance in the past. And the procedure that we have followed would be the precedent for similar incidents in the future, because I also do not recall in the rules that would, or the rules of the Senate that would treat of this kind of a situation. So just for the record, the Senate in its reconstituted as in plenary the BICAM conferees for the Senate, so that in the future, should this arise again, we can follow the same procedure. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Now, Mr. Sponsor, the bicameral conference committee is a process that we use to reconcile conflicting provisions in the two versions that the House and the Chamber and the House of Representatives would approve. The bicameral conference committee process is not in the Constitution, if I recall correctly.
May I know the question, Mr. President? Can you repeat the question?
I am saying that the Constitution of the Bicameral Conference Committee is not a process outlined in the Constitution in the passage of the laws. This is by our tradition.
But it's a parliamentary.
It's not in the Constitution, Mr. President. I agree with you.
Yes. And so it is by tradition. So the procedure that we followed is a procedure that we just adopted from the tradition of both houses.
Yes, Mr. President.
Now, having said that, Mr. President, thank you very much. May we know what is the basic difference between the first BICAM report submitted and which did not get the majority vote and the BICAM report being submitted now?
The main difference, Mr. President, is the provisions in section Section 4, paragraph D.
Section 4,
Paragraph D.
all right. Section 4, paragraph D. Mr. President, is Section 4, Paragraph D, was it in the original bill passed by this chamber?
Yes, that was included in the original bill that was passed during the first bicameral conference
No.
committee report, Mr. President.
I beg to disagree, Mr. President. The matter of providing for a security protection unit who will be given firearms was not in the original Senate Bill 1832, as the records may show. Can the gentleman confirm that? I do not recall that it was in the original bill that we passed. In fact, Mr. President, there was an effort to introduce this as an amendment, and we rejected it as a chamber. Is that a correct recollection, sir?
Yeah, correct, Mr. President. That was an amendment coming from the House conference during our bicameral first bicameral conference meeting, Mr. President.
No, yes, and it was not in the bill that we passed in the Senate.
Yes.
And neither, yes, and neither was it provided in the House version that was discussed initially in the Bicameral Conference Committee.
Yes, Mr. President.
So that isn't the Bicameral Conference Committee constituted to reconcile the conflicting provisions between the versions of the House and the Senate?
Yes, Mr. President, ideally, that should be the case. But what is in practice is that during bicameral conference committee meetings, amendments will be introduced and accepted during the BICAM, Mr. President.
Yes, I agree with the good gentleman, Mr. President, that amendments are introduced. But these amendments are designed to find a common ground on the conflicting provisions between the two versions. If there is no conflicting, if there is no provision to reconcile, there is no basis for the introduction of any provision which is not existing at all. Would the gentleman concur with that, or would the gentleman like to express his view on that? In other words, yes, the BICAM is there, Bicameral Conference Committee is there by tradition. We would use to reconcile the different provisions, the disagreeing provisions of the bills. In fact, when the BICAM report is submitted to the chamber, the premise is to reconcile the disagreeing provisions of the Senate and the House version. In this particular case, insofar as the arming of the firemen are concerned, to my recollection, the provision was not found either in the House or in the Senate versions, and therefore the question that I ask the good sponsor is, what did we reconcile if there were no conflicting provisions?
Yes, Mr. President, I agree with you. As I've said, ideally or theoretically, the purpose of the Bicameral Conference Committee meeting is to reconcile the disagreeing provisions between the House version and the Senate version. But it happens, Mr. President, many times that during Bicameral Conference Committee meeting, there are some provisions that will just pop out coming from any side of the conference, Mr. President. And even new sections are being made during the Bicameral Conference Committee meeting, Mr. President. I'm just talking about reality. It happens, Mr. President.
Yes, but okay, yes, it happens. It happens it has happened, but does that make it correct, Mr. President?
Well, if that is wrong, Mr. President, then what does it make about the laws that were passed and that were passed previously? Will it invalid all those laws that were passed into law na later on na-find out natin mayroon palang mga ganong pangyayari na inintroduce lang during the Bicameral Conference Committee meeting? You're more knowledgeable than me, Mr. President.
Yes.
I will ask
Well,
you
it
the
is.
question.
Yes. Yes, my reply, Mr. President, is that yes, it is valid until invalidated by the Supreme Court. And that's what we are pointing out here, that this is subject to challenge in the Supreme Court, this kind of a process that we are following.
Thank you for that education, Mr. President. Thank you.
Okay. Anyway, okay. So, as you have previously mentioned a few minutes ago, the new provision between the first BICAM report and the second BICAM report is Section 4D. Is that correct, Mr. President?
Sorry, Mr. President, I am just distracted.
Yes.
Can you please? I was distracted by the majority leader. He is coaching me, Mr. President. Can you
the
please
majority leader.
repeat the question, Mr. President?
Yes, you're saying,
No, Mr. President. No, I was just, no, Mr. President. I was not coaching or badgering.
I have the floor.
We were just,
I have
with the permission
floor,
of the
Mr.
colleagues.
President.
No, with the permission of our colleagues, I had just, because I had spoken to our secretariat and asked the same question on the Supreme Court rulings. Apparently, there is a legal precedent, Supreme Court in Tolentino versus Secretary of Finance, where the Supreme Court upheld that the Bicameral Conference Committee can indeed introduce amendments that are not, amendments are allowed under the Bicameral Conference Committee hearings, Mr. President.
If I remember
I
right,
just mentioned it so that we can be clarified, because I have sat in Bicameral Conference Committee hearings, Mr. President, as chairman, and I'm also guilty of introducing new amendments that were not part of the discussions of the bills.
no,
Yes,
both
so-
houses are guilty every year in the budget.
Yes,
They always introduce provisions and line items in the budget during the bicameral
Yes.
conference committee in the budget. And, but anyway, I think if I recall it right, the Tolentino versus Department of Finance ruling says that, sabi ng Supreme Court, anyway, dadaan pa naman doon sa House uli yun for ratification.
Yes.
Kaya yun yung...
Thank you very much, Mr. President. So just to correct the good sponsor, the intervention of the majority leader is in order. You should not blame the majority leader for intervening. The next time he does that, you move for the to declare the seat vacant, Mr. Sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Anyway, thank you, sir. Now, so okay, it is Section 4D, which is the basic difference between the first and the second BICAM report. Just for the record, is that correct, sir? Section 4D is the new section, which is not found
yes, Mr.
in
President.
the original BICAM report.
Actually, not the whole section, Mr. President. A part of it is new. If you
Yes.
allow me to read the
Yes,
new
sir.
portion, Mr. President.
Yes.
It starts with that every security and protection unit, SPU, shall be composed of not more than 14 personnel comprised of 2 team leaders with the rank of at least fire inspector and team members who shall undergo a neuropsychological examination and periodic trainings. provided furthermore that BFP personnel with the rank of Senior Fire Officer 3, this is a part of the amendment of Senator Hontiveros, may be given priority to be appointed as SPO team member, provided finally that SPO shall be provided with appropriate equipment to protect firefighters during fire suppression, containment of hazmat and CBRNA materials, fire investigation, and in the performance of all other acts pertinent to their mandate. That's the new portion, Mr.
Yes.
President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me ask a few questions on this new provision because this was never discussed on the floor before. What is the appropriate equipment that the SPU should be provided with?
Well, being the security and protection unit, Mr. President, we assume that they need short firearms to protect their co-firefighters during fire suppression operations, Mr. President.
So the appropriate equipment here would refer to firearms,
Yes, Mr. President.
nothing else.
Maybe body armor or
Body armor.
but the basic equipment, Mr. President, is the handgun, the sidearm.
Oh, okay. What about body cameras?
Body camera, Mr. President, we can include that.
I'm sorry.
Yes, Mr. President, we can include the body cameras since it is already required in the PNP as required by the Supreme Court. PNP
yes.
during law enforcement operations should wear body-worn camera. So maybe during fire security and protection operations, in case of fire, then we require this firefighters, members of the security and protection unit to wear the body-worn camera.
So yes, but without amending this particular provision, we can spread into the record the phrase appropriate equipment would include body cameras.
Yes, Mr. President. I agree.
And yes. Now, the provision for SPUs of not more than 14 personnel with 2 team leaders, etc., shall be constituted in every region and city. Is that correct, sir?
Mr. President. Correct.
How many regions do we have for the Bureau of Fire Protection?
We have currently 17 fire regional offices and 146 cities, Mr. President. 146 city fire stations.
Okay. So how many would compose in total the special security protection unit that we are constituting here? How many additional personnel?
Mr. President, there will be a total of 2,282 personnel who will be authorized to carry firearms as members of the police protection and security unit. Compared to the whole population or the whole strength of the BFP, which is 32,800, it translates to 7.9%, Mr. President. So less than 10%. Only 7.9% of the firefighters will be issued short firearms as members of the security and protection unit, Mr. President.
Are the security and protection unit personnel also firemen who would be called upon to help put up a fire? Or
Yep.
talagang ito security lang, bodyguard lang?
Basically, Mr. President, first and foremost, their mandate is really is fire suppression. Yung kanilang assignment with the Security and Protection Unit is a secondary only, Mr. President. They are
Okay.
being recruited as firefighters, not as policemen or as security personnel. But
Thank you.
protecting their comrades is just as secondary to their mandate.
Okay, so principally, they will be firefighters whose secondary duty is to provide security and protection to their personnel, to their comrades, or to their co-firemen. Is that they are firemen first and foremost?
Yes,
That's
Mr.
what-
President.
All right. Now, so will they be performing law enforcement functions?
No, Mr. President. Their unit is very clear. Is security and protection unit. They are not enforcing laws, except of course their basic mandate that is enforcing the fire code of the Philippines, which is a law. They are enforcing that law, the fire code of the Philippines. But as per other pertinent laws, I don't think so, Mr. President.
Except for a citizen's arrest, they are not given a separate power to arrest people, which is basically a function of the PNP and the law enforcement agencies of our government. Would the gentleman agree with our statement?
Yes, I agree, Mr. President.
All right. Mr. President, would there be fire trucks in a regional office? Would the personnel of the regional office be involved in firefighting or with on administrative work?
The people in the regional offices, Mr. President, are basically admin personnel. But the reason why we allocate 14 personnel to compose the regional security and protection unit at the regional level is it is because only the cities are provided with the security and protection unit. Ang municipal fire station, ang provincial offices ay wala pong security unit, Mr. President. So we know for a fact that the action is always at the cities. Ang maraming sunog nandiyan palagi sa syudad, so minabuti natin na doon tayo maglagay ng security sa city fire station. But Mr. President, marami tayong malalaking municipal fire stations na palagi ring engaged sa sunog. So, pag dumating yung time na yan, na may mga kailangan, yung mga municipal fire stations ng security personnel, then the region can provide, Mr. President, yung 14 personnel nila na nagjo-duty 7-man team at any given time. Ayun po ay pwedeng i-deploy sa municipal fire stations kapag kinakailangan ng kanilang presensya doon, Mr. President. Parang concept of reinforcement, Mr. President. Reinforcement, but highly centralized at the region dahil alam natin, bihira naman talaga masyado yung malalaking problema sa municipal fire stations. Nasa syudad man ang problema.
Parang roving security unit ito mga ito.
Yes, Mr. President. Parang mobile. Kung where the action is, kung saan sila kailangan.
This is a concept also of the military, hindi po ba? Mobile forces being transferred from one area to the other.
Yes, Mr.
Is that
President.
correct? Are we militarizing our firemen? Hindi naman.
Hindi naman, Mr. President. Yung concept na yan is kahit na yung mga civilian offices natin, civilian agencies ng gobyerno ay nag-perform rin ng ganong functions. Yung kagaya ng mga Human Rights Commission
kapag walang abogado doon sa isang region o isang province na maraming inimbestigahan ng mga human rights violation cases, ay nagpapadala yung regional office ng mga abogado doon para mag-imbestiga. So,
Okay.
parang ganun rin, Mr. President, ang concept.
Mr. President, can the good sponsor spread into the record the rationale for this proposal, arming our firemen?
Well,
Or
Mr.
at least
President, as
fighting for a security unit? What's the rationale for this proposal?
Mr. President, if I may, with the permission of Senator Gatchalian and Senator Tolentino, during our bicameral conference meeting this morning, they share with the Bicam conference their experience as local chief executives of Valenzuela City and Tagaytay City. Na kung merong sunog, ay kawawa talaga ang firemen kung walang security dahil maraming mga tao na mga unruly people, lalong-lalo na kung ang sunog ay nandun sa mga I don't know how to properly call this, squatter area na nakadikit-dikit ang mga bahay kung saan gustong-gusto ng ibang tao na maunang buhusan ng tubig from the fire hose yung kanilang bahay kahit na malayo pa sa priority. Inaagaw na yung mga hose. Pag puwapalag yung mga firemen, sinasaksak, pinapalo, basta sinasakta, Mr. President. I myself, being a former chief of police of many municipal police stations and city police districts, I have experienced this incidents, Mr. President, within pagdating namin sa area, ikakarga na lang namin yung mga fireman na nasaksak, dinadala namin sa hospital dahil nga inaaway ng mga tao na gustong umagaw sa kanilang hose. O kaya, pag hindi tinitira ng fire hose yung kanilang bahay, pinuputol nila yung hose sa iniitak. I don't know how to, paano yan sa Tagalog yan, basta pinuputol yung mga hose or yung fire engine mismo sinisira. These are very common happenings during fire incident, Mr. President. So, para yung mga ating mga firemen ay feeling secured, they should feel secure during their fire operations. Hindi na sila mag-isip sa kanilang personal safety while performing their duty in fire suppression operations. Kailangan talagang merong magsisecure sa kanila, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for that, for the recitation of what the good sponsor has seen actually happen. But, Mr. President, aside from this anecdotal evidence, is there any, can we place on the record the data? Is there an official data of the incidents that happened? Do we have data on which cities, which regions these incidents took place, other than the anecdotal evidence just mentioned on the record by the good sponsor? Meron po ba tayong record kung ilan po ang nangyayaring mga krimen, kaya po sinusulong natin itong security unit?
Right now, Mr. President, I don't have the data, but maybe later I can furnish you a copy coming from the Bureau of Fire Protection. But believe you me, Mr. President, this may be anecdotal narratives, but these are personal experience, Mr. President, and I don't intend to lie about those experiences, Mr. President. That were really true, and they were being corroborated by Senator Win Gatchalian and Senator Tolentino, being former mayors of big cities in the Philippines, Mr. President. So maybe I can give you the data, Mr. President, once I have them from the Bureau of Fire, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, just for the record, I have never implied that the good gentleman is not telling the truth.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, we
Thank you.
accept the statement of the good gentleman. I have known the gentleman from Davao. He's a man of integrity. We just want to see and to know the base if there is indeed a record of these incidents, because this is precisely the reason and the justification for putting up the security and protection unit. So it is valid for us to raise the question as to the number of incidents that we seek to that will justify the creation or hiring of 2,282 firemen to provide security services. But let us leave it at that, and we do hope that the gentleman can provide us with the data that he said is in existence to justify this the formation of these security units. Now, each city will have 14 personnel. May mga are there stations where the number of firemen are less than 14?
For city fire station, Mr. President, there's none, Mr. President.
So lahat mahigit po sa 14 na bombero sa
Yes,
bawat
Mr.
istasyon.
President. Yes po,
Okay,
Mr. President. And Mr. President, if I may, I just would like to
Yes.
impress upon this body that kaya namin nilagay na 14 because there was even a suggestion coming from the majority leader na gawin daw naming percentage. Kumbaga, mag-allocate tayo ng 10% or 5% from the total strength of certain fire station. So, Mr. President, kapag ngayon, halimbawa, yung Valenzuela Fire Station ay merong, let's say, 500 na firemen. Ang 10% yan is 50. Then next year, magre-recruit na naman sila dahil part of the modernization program is really to add more manpower to the BFP. So next year, lalaki na naman yung kanilang strength. Ngayon, 50. Pag next year, mag-recruit sila, magiging, let's say, 600 na sila next year, plus 100. So, ang security and protection unit, tutubo na naman, magiging from 50, magiging 60 na sila. So, I am afraid that this may cause some, some doubts coming from our colleagues in the Senate na baka kung hindi natin i-fix yung number, magkakaroon ng elbow room yung BFP to arm as they want to arm their personnel. So pinix talaga natin, regardless kung lalaki yung kanilang strength, naka-fix talaga yan sa 14, Mr. President, para hindi tayo magduda na aarmasan ng buong BFP yung kanilang buong fire station. Otherwise, that will be a violation of law kung lalampas sa 14 yung kanilang armadong membro ng Security and Protection Unit dahil it is stated in this provision na kailangan 14 lang. So that's the rationale behind, Mr. President.
Yes, but how did we arrive at the number 14? Just wondering, Mr. President.
Number
Can we
14,
spread
Mr.
it to the
President,
record?
is that
Why the number 14? Why not 10? Why not 20?
Mr. President, the ideal team of in any uniform organization is a 7-man team. So 7 times 2 equals 14. Ginawa natin 14, Mr. President, dahil very
kaneto na estimate, Mr. President, na magkakaroon sila ng 2 shifts per day. Dahil hindi man pwedeng 24 hours mag-duty yung fireman natin. So kailangan in a day, merong night shift, merong day shift. So every shift, 7 personnel, Mr. President, 1 team. A 7-man team with 1 team leader and 6 members will man the security and protection unit, Mr. President. So all in all, 14 sila dahil dalawang teams.
Okay, now, my impression is that this unit is being constituted to provide protection in case of fires in actual conflagration that happens, or the firemen are called upon to put off the fire. Is that a correct assumption, sir?
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay.
But yan ang pinaka-primary purpose ito, Mr. President. But nakalagay na dito sa ating provision na appropriate equipment to protect firefighters during fire suppression, containment of hazmat and CBRNA materials, fire investigation. Kasi there are times, Mr. President, na mag-conduct sila ng fire investigation yung ating mga arson investigators na under threat. May mga lugar na kinakailangan i-secure sila habang nagkakandak ng arson investigation. And in the performance of all other acts pertinent to their mandate. So that's it, Mr. President.
Yes. Now, so in other words, to provide basic security to our firemen, whether or not actually involved in fire suppression or investigating.
Yes, Mr. President.
Mr. President, we are all aware of instances where law enforcement personnel who are not on duty carrying firearms actually get involved in incidents which wherein the use of the firearms would cause the death of ordinary citizens. This is widely reported in the media. I could not, the ones, if I recall correctly, in Pangasinan, if I recall correctly, where there was that policeman who shot a mother, and several incidents. Now, is it possible, Mr. President, that since there will be 2 shifts, that the firearms of those who are not on shift should be deposited in the fire station in order to avoid all of these possibilities that we have seen? Pwede po bang iwanan yung baril pag hindi sila on duty?
Well,
Especially that they without uniforms, Mr. President. Huh?
We can do that, Mr. President.
We can do that, no?
Yes,
So that we can. Okay, very good. In other words, again, it cannot be in the law because it's already a Bicam report, and we cannot amend it. But for the record, would the good sponsor agree that once this bill becomes a law, the Bureau of Fire Protection should issue a regulation that would require the security unit to leave their firearms in the station, in the fire station, when they are not on duty?
Yes, Mr. President, I agree. In fact, it is as a matter of policy, all armed personnel of the uniform service, kung ang armas na hawak nila ay organic firearms or government-issued firearms, Mr. President, once they are off duty, talagang nakalagay yan doon sa arm rack, Mr. President, nasa armory yan, binabalik nila yan. Then, we-withdraw lang nila pag mag-duty sila. But for personal firearms, na covered sila ng mga pertinent documents per our firearms law, then they can bring their personal firearms home, Mr. President. Lalong-lalo na ngayon na pag nagawa natin itong, once this bill is passed into law, wala pang nabiling firearms yung mga
yung Bureau of Fire, maybe they will authorize their personnel to use their firearms provided these firearms are properly documented and they are really authorized to carry firearms outside of residence per our firearms law, Mr. President.
Well, yes, I am referring to government-issued firearms, obviously, Mr. President, because those which are privately owned are governed by another set of laws, including permit to carry, etc. So I'm just referring to government-issued firearms issued to this security protection unit when they are not on duty. It is supposed to be left
Armory,
in
Armory, Mr. President.
yes, in the armory. So, okay. Well, Mr. President, we have no more questions, but we just want to manifest of record that we cannot agree to this proposal, but we will submit it to the will of the chamber. We just interpose an objection to the adoption of this bicameral conference committee report, principally because we do not believe that it is justified and that we should arm what otherwise is a civilian unit of the government. So with that, we want to thank the good sponsor for responding to our questions. And again, I would manifest for the record that we are placing our objection to the adoption of the BICAM report. Thank you very much, Mr. Sponsor. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank the minority leader for his efforts. I know your objection is anchored on your belief that you really want a peaceful Philippines, Mr. President. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. President,
Mr.
thank you very
President.
much to, yes, may we recognize Senator Risa Ontiveros.
Senator Ontiveros recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just for the record, Mr. President, unang-una sa lahat, I express my gratitude and appreciation to the chairperson for accommodating some of my proposals to at least impose some standards on the BFP personnel to be assigned to the Security and Protection Unit. I signed the bicameral report to express support for BFP modernization while maintaining my reservation to Section 4D of the same. However, I wish to place on record in plenary, as I did during the BICAM proceedings earlier today, that my objection to firefighters bearing arms remains. This is unfortunately not cured by limiting their number or imposing criteria or standards. The global evidence and debate simply do not support the proposition that emergency services personnel, including firefighters, should carry arms. And these arguments have already been ventilated in this chamber and need not be repeated. Salamat po. For the record, I will abstain on the bicameral report, again, with my respect and my gratitude to the chair. Salamat po, Mr. President.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. In fact, just would like to inform this August chamber that Senator Hontiveros actively participated in the bicameral conference committee this morning, and her inputs were very valuable. Thank you, Senator Hontiveros.
Salamat po, Mr. Chair, Mr. President.
Mr. President. Mr. President, Senator Coco Pimentel is raising his hand.
Senator Coco Pimentel is recognized.
Just a question about the new BICAM report for the chairman. Mr. President, our panel knows the reason for the non-acceptance of the first BICAM report, and it was really anchored on the provision arming some, if not all, of the BFP personnel under the so-called SPU. SPU. So may I ask the chairman, since we know the reason, there was a stiff opposition to the first BICAM report, how come we retained such a controversial section in the second BICAM report? And is it worth all the effort and all of the debates that this will now cause a possible rejection or delay in the bill modernizing our BFP, Mr. President?
Yes,
Just an additional input there, Senator Pimentel, if I may add. Not only did this chamber reject the first Bicam report, but the amendment to the law, to the bill, when it was still being debated before we passed it on third reading. The specific amendment to arm our firemen was presented in Senate Bill 1832. It was rejected by the chamber. And that is why in the first Bicam report, we already made of record that our contingent should not have agreed to this because there was a specific rejection by the Senate, and they were supposed, the Bicam committee, our Bicameral conference contingent is supposed to carry out the mandate of the Senate. So just as an addition, as an input, Mr. Chair.
thank you, Mr. President. Reaction to that statement, Mr. President, is that actually some members of this body who previously opposed this measure during the first Bicam report, and some of those also who abstained gave me the impression that if we are going to limit the number or specify the number in this bill, the number of Bureau of personnel that will be allowed to carry firearms, then they will be reversing their stance, Mr. President. They will be fine with that kung nakalagay talaga yung exact or fixed number of personnel na authorized mag-carry ng firearms, Mr. President. So that encourage your chairman to move for the reconstitution of this bicameral conference committee, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President.
And this was relayed to you, Mr. President, informally?
Informally, Mr. President.
Informally, yeah, that's why,
Yes.
because I'm not aware of, I don't recall statements to that effect. So, Mr. President, the figure of around 2,280, members of the BFP will be armed, so with a small firearm lang po ba? Small firearm. And magkano po bang cost, budgetary cost po nito? Magkano po ba ang small firearm ngayong panahon?
At 35,000, Mr. President, per unit cost ng short firearms. 35,000. So, times 2,282 at
So 80 million, sir, mga 80 million.
79,870,000, Mr. President.
So
79,870,000 to be exact.
but under the measure we are discussing, Mr. President, the decision on what arms to buy is left to the BFP leadership, no? Well, it is not in the law, so they can add to a small firearm, a long firearm, but that's possible, sir.
Well, it was spread in the records, Mr. President, during our deliberation that we specified that it's only short firearms. Short firearms na po, Mr. President, for security purposes.
Sayang.
Medyo pangit naman kasi tingnan siguro kung ang isang bumbero may dala ng hose ng fire hose, mayroon pa siyang mahabang armas, Mr. President. But para bang hindi maganda tingnan. So short firearms lang, Mr. President.
Sayang po kasi kung lahat pala of the same mind lahat, both panels, all the members of both panels, di sana na-clarify po yun in a proviso. Pero hindi po siya clearly stated, no, sa measure that we are discussing.
Yeah, it's not clearly stated, Mr. President.
Yes, sir. Okay. Kasi of course, by regulation also, the BFP can also say that some SPU members will concentrate on protection. Hindi yung may hawak kang long and then hawak mo ang hose, di ba? So actually they can buy long firearms so that they will concentrate on protection and not really participate in putting out fires.
Yeah, Mr. President, yeah. But in times that they need the deployment of long firearms, maybe it's about time for them to call up the Philippine National Police for support. Ang itong kuha lang natin, Mr. President, na merong organic member ng Bureau of Fire na once ma-deployed yung kanilang firefighters, na nandun kaagad, nakadikit sa kanila for security reasons. So short firearms lang kailangan natin. In case they need the deployment of long firearms, tawag lang sila sa police station, Mr. President. Then they can provide that.
But if the BFP in the future under this if this becomes law will decide to buy long firearms, we cannot castigate them, no? We cannot file any charges against them for violation of the law.
Well, based on the provisions of the law, we cannot, Mr. President. But if they really want to check on the records in the deliberation of this measure, Mr. President, very clear na sinasabi natin dito na short firearms lang ang hawak nila dapat. But then again, we can exercise our oversight powers over this agency, Mr. President. Pag nakita natin na bumibili na sila ng firearm, hawak na sila ng firearm, pwede naman siguro natin silang sitahin.
With the permission of Senator Coco, can I just ask one question on this in this regard? Mr. President, I do recall a press statement of I think the DILG secretary saying that they are asking for budget from Malacanang to purchase firearms for the firemen. Can we ask the good sponsor to confirm that these firearms have already been purchased?
Yes, that's true, Mr. President. The request was made, but per verification from the Bureau of Fire, the request was turned down by the Department of Budget Management, Mr. President. Hindi po napunduhan yon dahil nga wala pang pera para doon, Mr. President. Hindi po napunduhan yon. Very clear yung sinabi ng Bureau of Fire. Hindi pa sila nakabili ng armas. Dahil nga rin, another reason is that na-reject itong measure na ito during the first Bicameral Conference Committee report that we made. So, lalo-lalo na hindi sila pinagbigyan ng DBM.
Yes. One last question. Senator Pangilinan, I think will ask his own question. So, Mr. President, this will not change the protocol, no? That when there is a fire incident, the BFP will still automatically ask for the help of the PNP to secure its firefighters as well as the area of the fire incident?
Well, that's a standard operating procedure, Mr. President. When there's fire, there's a Bureau of Fire and there's PNP to secure the area.
Yes, now that we will have an SPU, that will not change.
That will not change, Mr. President. Kaya nga lang, with the deployment of the SPU, additional psychological satisfaction or sa feeling of security from among our firefighters na meron talaga sa security. Darating man o hindi ang pulis, halimbawa, busy yung pulis, may ibang emergency na nire-respondihan, hindi makarating kagad ng pulis, nandyan na yung Bureau of Fire na organic sa kanila, nakasama nila during deployment. So, yan po ang reason nito, Mr. President. But as far as protocols, coordination protocols between the Bureau of Fire and the PNP,
I don't think so that it will be changed once
Yes.
this measure is signed into law or once
Yeah.
this law is being implemented, Mr. President.
Oh, kasi sir, kanina nabanggit na parang roving security force ito, lalo na sa probinsya at municipality dahil regions and cities lang ito. While ang police, present sa kada munisipyo, present din sa province at present din sa region. So, mas present ang police kaysa sa SPU. So, dapat hindi talaga magbago yung protocol.
Yes, Mr. President, I agree with you. It should be maintained.
Yes, so thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Coco. Mr. Majority Leader, sir, Senator Pangilinan is raising his hand.
Yes, may we recognize Senator Pangilinan.
Senator Pangilinan is recognized.
Walang sound. Hindi ko marinig, Senator Pangilinan.
You're muted. Naka-unmute na siya. Mahina ang internet. Wala. He's unmuted, but there's no sound. There is no sound, Senator Pangilinan. I suggest that you reconnect. Senator Pangilinan,
I think we lost Senator Pangilinan, Mr. President. We lost connection, Senator Pangilinan. Yeah, basically, we lost him in the screen. So maybe we can move to suspend for a few minutes to wait for Senator Pangilinan, Mr. President.
perhaps if Senator Pangilinan can monitor, just mute your video and just use use your
Audio.
audio to ask your questions. Baka mas malakas ang kumuha ng signal yung video.
Well, it would be better, Mr. President, since there's a lull in our proceedings to suspend for
Session suspended. Senator Pangilinan, do you have a sound now?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader. Thank you for this for the opportunity to raise some questions. Maybe would the good sponsor be willing to answer one or two questions?
Yes, Mr. President.
Yes, thank you. Did I hear it correctly? Because I had to leave because of certain technical problems. That the
Yeah.
budget that will be allocated for the firearms will be about 80 million?
Yes, Mr. President.
Yes, yes. And this will be made available this year, is that correct? Once this is approved?
Subject to availability of funds, Mr. President, once this bill is signed into law, the BFP will request for this funding requirement, Mr. President.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. I have no other questions, but I'd like to make a manifestation that I would like to associate myself with the observations of our minority leader that this particular provision on arming our firefighters was not accommodated when we passed the bill on third reading. It was subsequently again rejected when we were to ratify the first bicameral committee report, and yet here we are, and the provision is still here after two rounds of being voted down. As such, we are concerned that this is again being brought to our attention, and that we are inclined not to support the ratification of the bicameral conference committee report. Can also be recalled, Mr. President, that we were debating the funding for the upgrading of hospitals for this and laws, specific bills, and that precisely we had the DBM said that they cannot support or they cannot provide the necessary funds for the approval of these bills upgrading hospitals for this year, and that it will have to be funded next year. Precisely because resources are scarce, and it's unfortunate that we are unable to fund upgrading of hospitals in the middle of the pandemic, and yet here we are funding arming of our firefighters to the tune of 80 million. I think that is precisely why the first time it was asked to be approved, it was rejected. The second time that the ratification was to be undertaken, that it was likewise rejected. I see no reason why we should support it this time around, and this is our manifestation. We would like to modernize the Bureau of Fire. Definitely it needs modernization. Definitely we need to address the challenges of firefighting and the safety and protection of our citizens. But I do not see it in the context of having to arm our firefighters so that they can effectively fight the fires, as earlier already argued and manifested in the third read, in the debates, and then in the ratification, and now again in the second ratification of this bicameral report. For the record, Mr. President, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, distinguished sponsor. Salamat.
Thank you, Senator Pangilinan, for that. Salamat, salamat.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, yes, just a short manifestation. Initially, we were afraid that all members of the BFP would be made into an armed force. And initially, we also thought that their functions would be sort of similar to law enforcement. which was clarified by our distinguished sponsor that it's limited to only security of their personnel during the time of fire, not prevention, but extinguishing fires in this particular area, Mr. President. Also, when we abstained together with the majority, with the Senate President the last time, it was also the reason being that we felt that we went with the majority at that time who voted against the arming of the Bureau of Fire and Protection with firearms, not knowing the exact extent of what they were going to do with these firearms and this unit. But now, after several lengthy discussions, even in Malacanang when we were with the President also clarified this in front of myself, the Senate President, the Speaker of the House, and other members of Congress, with the idea and agreement that it would be limited to only a small number of personnel that will really just secure our firemen during times of fires, Mr. President. Then, therefore, I'd agreed, Mr. President, to change my vote this particular issue. For the record, Mr. President. So we moved. It's been duly sponsored. The procedure is to vote on the measure with the permission of the minority floor leader. We can just say those who wish to vote differently may do so, and instead of calling for a roll call vote, unless the minority floor leader would wish to do so. May we recognize
Yes.
the minority floor leader is raising his hand.
Minority Leader is recognized.
Yes, may I ask for a nominal voting, Mr. President? Nominal
Therefore, we proceed
voting.
to nominal vote, Mr. President.
All right, the Minority Leader requested for a nominal vote. Majority Leader has no problem with that.
Yes.
So,
May I ask for a 1 minute suspension to make sure that our colleagues know that there will be a nominal vote? May I ask for a 1 minute suspension, Mr. President?
session suspended.
We can proceed, Mr. President, with the
Yes, the Secretary is directed to conduct a roll call vote on the motion of Senator De La Rosa and the Majority Leader.
Roll call vote. Honorable Senators Angara,
Vote in favor of ratification, Mr. President.
Binay.
I still vote no.
No. No.
No.
Cayetano,
I vote yes.
De Lima, De La Rosa,
Yes, of course.
Drilon.
No. No.
Is that ano? No. Gatchalian, Go.
Yes, yes. Yes.
Gordon. Ontiveros.
Abstain, Mr. President.
Abstain. Lacson. Lapid.
Yes.
Marcos.
Yes.
Pacquiao. Pangilinan.
No, I vote no.
No. Pimentel III.
I abstain.
Abstain. Poe. Recto.
Mr. President, I'm in favor of the BFP modernization, but against arming the BFP. It would be a misplaced priority, and therefore I vote no. Thank you.
No. Revilla Jr. Tolentino. Villanueva. Villar.
Yes.
Zubiri. Senate President Soto III.
Yes.
Yes, you.
14. With 14 affirmative votes, 4 negative votes, and 2 abstention, the bicameral conference committee report is hereby adopted.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, just for the record, that the text of joint explanation be inserted into the records of the chamber of both measures. So moved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none.
Leader.
Motion approved.
Just some housekeeping. For the record, Mr. President, we had on our agenda today an act regulating the importation, manufacture, sale,
Mr.
packaging,
President.
distribution of VPN products. Our distinguished colleague from Cagayan de Oro had asked to.
Just a
Mr.
minute.
President.
Go ahead.
Oh yes,
Leader.
Senator Cayetano, Mr. President. My
Senator
apologies,
Cayetano.
I didn't hear her. Sorry. Mahina yung signal dito. Go ahead.
Senator Cayetano, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd just like to explain my vote. I was one of those who voted no.
Ano?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Mr. President? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So I just want to explain my vote. I was one of those who voted against the bicameral report a few months ago. And I was listening intently today to the discussions, and I share the concerns raised by many of our colleagues, in particular the Minority Floor Leader, Senator Pangilinan. And I do believe that one of the biggest expense that we should focus on is healthcare. But 80 million pesos, I will have to trust the sponsor
Sakto lang yan,
that
di ba?
he knows what he is doing, and that because going to depressed areas where I've encountered so many fires, I do know that this is still a big problem for us. So I voted yes with very strong reservations, and I trust that the good sponsor will really shepherd this law so that there are no abuses, and in the months to come, I hope His Honor will be a staunch advocate for healthcare, because it's really high time that we focus on healthcare and not firearms. That is my humble position. In any case, I voted yes already, but those are my reservations. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Yes, you remind me of Senator Letty Letty Ramos Shahani. She usually votes a critical yes.
Thank you, Mr.
All right,
President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President,
Yes, Senator Pamitel.
how was the vote of the Senate President recorded? Because
Yes.
that is a unique vote. That is not even a critical
yes.
yes.
I was going to tease. I was teasing Senator De La Rosa. Na kunwari mag-abstain ako, but I said yes.
Okay, so it was a yes. Okay.
yes, it was a yes.
Mr. President, we just have a one-page reference of business, additional reference.
Yes, please, Secretary.
Second additional reference of business. Messages from the House of Representatives. Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 3 August 2021, it passed the following House bills in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate. House number 9422, an act granting Maynilad Water Services, Inc., a franchise to establish, operate, and maintain a water supply and distribution system and sewerage and sanitation services in the West Zone service area of Metro Manila and province of Cavite.
To the Committee on Public Services.
House number 9423, an act granting Manila Water Company, Inc., a franchise to establish, operate, and maintain the waterworks and sewerage system in the East Zone service area of Metro Manila and the province of Rizal.
Public Services.
Letter from the House of Representatives transmitting to the Senate a copy of Resolution number 168, entitled Resolution Calling for the Immediate Ratification by the Philippine Government of International Labor Organization ILO Convention number 188, otherwise known as Work in Fishing Convention 2007 number 188, which was adopted by the House of Representatives on May 25, 2021.
To the Committee on Foreign Relations. Majority Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Going back to my statement earlier, we were supposed to take up other measures, but our colleagues like Senator Coco Pimentel, who just got his vaccination, so he begged off for the meantime, as well as other of our colleagues lined up for the other measures. However, we did do very well the last few days. We were able to close the period of interpellation of many bills, so we can start discussing the period of amendments. And hopefully when we get back, we can move forward with many of our proposed measures, Mr. President. Just for the record, Senator Villar would like to co-author the resolution that I authored on the congratulating, commending Nesty Petesio. This is resolution number 813. If she can be made also co-author, Mr. President. A co-sponsor and author.
All right,
Thank you.
we place that
For
on
the
the
record.
record.
So with no other items on the agenda, Mr. President, I thank my dear colleagues. In spite of the difficulties we're facing now with the pandemic, many attended face-to-face in the session. And to those who are all online, we thank them as well. And once again, congratulate the birthday celebrants. We had Tita Cynthia Villar, who was with us 2 days ago. We'd also like to congratulate and greet happy birthday to Senator Richard Dick Gordon, my ninong, who will celebrate his birthday tomorrow, and also our 2 distinguished colleagues, Senator Kiko Pangilinan, and of course our Senate President, who are going to celebrate their birthdays very soon. Happy birthday to all of you. May you all have more blessings from the Lord above. Mr. President, with that, I move to suspend session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Monday. And I repeat, Mr. President, this is a suspension of session, not adjournment. To 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Monday, August 23, 2021, subject to a reconvening at an earlier date as may be determined by the Senate President in consultation with the Majority Leader and the Minority Leader, Mr. President.
All right, any objection? Hearing none. The session is suspended until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Monday, August 23, 2021, subject to the reconvening at an earlier date as may be determined by the Senate President in consultation with the Majority Leader and the Minority Leader.
Maraming salamat po.